support them to be able to do that. But there is a particular challenge there that, of course, my colleagues will need to work through.
He also says it's disappointing that there's no commitment today from the Treasury to invest in a new infrastructure that London needs. That's a deliberate choice, is it, on your part, to move things, the spending, the investment out of London and the South East?
This is always the problem because everyone would like their thing. We can't do everything. I mean, look, there's significant investment coming into London in terms of transport for London, you know, pretty significant chunks of money going into TfL, our commitment to Heathrow and all of the consequences around that, our commitment to affordable housing and social housing, which will include a significant build in London. But of course, are there projects that the Mayor would have liked to have had that's not been funded? Sure, but there are in other parts of the country. What we're trying to do, we've increased capital investment, we've put capital investment into London, but as you heard the Chancellor say last week, we're also tilting capital investment to the North and the Midlands, which historically have been underinvested in, and that just means that it doesn't go around as much as some people might like to have it.
And can I also ask you about, there was news today on jobs, the fact that there are now tens of thousands fewer people in employment. Now, a lot of sectors, including the hospitality sector, the tourism sector, they are blaming the rise in employers' national insurance. Are you worried about the jobs market?
Well, as always, there's some kind of up arrows and some down arrows on the jobs market. You know, we've actually had, I think it's 500,000 jobs created since we came into office. We know from lots of our announcements today that it will create a lot of demand for jobs in certain sectors around the country, support for public servants as well. But of course, we do have a problem with people not in education, training or skills, particularly at the lower end. We've got a problem in terms of inactivity where people have been too sick to be able to work for a long time. The last government used to just discount people who were sick and not in work and then say employment was going up, but just completely ignored the fact that so many people were coming out of the labour market altogether. You know, our investment into skills and training, our reforms of the welfare system, our funding for further education colleges, all of these are trying to help get those people back into work so that we can get those numbers up. But we've certainly got a job to do.
One final question, very short answer. Who was the most difficult cabinet minister to deal with?
I'm not answering that question.
Right, we need to let you go. Darren Jones there, Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Thank you very much indeed. And before you go, Paul, just a final word from you on your overview of this.
Well, overall, we got what we expected, which is a fair bit of money for health. Despite what you heard, what sounded like a lot of giveaways, actually really tight for quite a lot of other areas. And as I said earlier, I think three things are going to, my guess is that 3 or 4 things are going to come back and be difficult for Darren and his colleagues. One is defence spending is sticking at 2.6% of national income in 2027. So there's another 2 years to go when there's going to be no further progress towards the 3% the government says it's committed to, and that, they're going to come under pressure on that, I think. Secondly, I know that we've got a reduction in the number of school pupils over this period, but this looks like a very tight settlement for schools, particularly given that some of the money is going on free school meals, and we know that there's real pressure on special educational needs. So I think that's going to be difficult. There's going to be a lot more pressure on public sector pay over this period, and there's not a lot of money going in there for public sector pay. So I think those are the sorts of things where we're going to see continued pressures, but this is, you know, this is a settlement within, as you'd expect, within the tight budgets, and you know, the use has been made of savings from the asylum, from overseas aid, and so on, to smooth out some of those reductions.
OK, we had to let you go too. For the last time, Paul Johnson, you're standing down from your role at the IFS, but thank you for helping us over so many years understand all of these figures, all very important figures. Thank you to both of you. Let's now go to Jim Connolly, who is in Leeds, to get some more reaction.
Yeah, we're at the old fire station, close here, obviously, and this is a community centre, and it helps a lot of people in an area where people genuinely suffer. There are 6 charities based out of here, so that gives you a scale of the problem that many people in the local area may be facing at the minute. There is obviously a very cheap joke that we're not going to make about where the axe has fallen today, but we're a serious programme, so we're going to have a serious chat with some people. Fran, you run this place. This area of Leeds, people struggle. What do you think was in today for those people?
I'm not sure there was very much, really. What we really need is for funding to be directed straight at the heart of communities. Things like community ownership of buildings and spaces, so that people at grassroots level can really use their own power and skills to help themselves. They know what to do and what needs doing. The funding needs to come right to us at the heart of communities.
Does it sometimes feel like it takes a long time to filter down? So a big announcement today could take maybe a couple of years to filter down here.
Completely, and the need is here and it's immediate, and I think also by the time it gets to us, lots of people have had a chomp at the pie, and the money is needed here for these people with this real lived experience of poverty and cost of living crisis and all the things that go hand in hand with that.
Well, Fran, thanks ever so much for having us down here. We've got a panel of people who are joining us. They were with us earlier, some of the people, and we're going to get some reaction now. We've heard from the Chancellor to what has been said. Tasha, you're new to us, so introduce yourself to us.
So my name is Tasha Brown, and I run the Black Health Initiative charity, where we fight for better health outcomes for marginalised communities here in Leeds and West Yorkshire.
So we've had announcements around increased investment in the NHS. I'm sure you think, is that a good thing?
We don't know how to feel about it, to be honest. We're very anxious. We want to know how that's going to impact the work that we do here at Black Health Initiative. So I suppose it's just fingers crossed that we have a really good outcome for us in the third sector.
You said to me before that you feel like you're sometimes just picking up the pieces at the end of the sort of line with the NHS. Is that your role?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the third sector, we definitely support the people that fall through the gaps. We help and support the NHS in areas where they can and they fall short. So we get referrals constantly on a weekly basis from different departments in the NHS, and we're having to go out and do clinical trials and you know, health checks on people and do supportive work and outreach work for many of the people in the community. So yeah, the third sector really needs these resources, and we hope it's a good outcome for us.
Henry, introduce yourself again to us.
So I'm Henry, and I'm from the Northern Powerhouse Partnership.
Big picture then, what does this mean for the north of England? What does today's announcement mean?
There's some really big news in the Chancellor's speech, and she indicated that in the next few weeks, very imminently, there'll be an announcement on something called Northern Powerhouse Rail, and that's what would connect cities like here in Leeds, not only to Hull towards the east, but going west towards first Bradford and then Manchester and Liverpool. And that's so important because we know that this city is constrained by the number of people who can get here every day, and that's to do with local transport. But it's also that if we were in London, people in Brighton, people in Cambridge would think nothing of going into work in London every day. The reality is people in Manchester, unless they're prepared to drive across the M62 and sort of take the lottery of how long that will take them, cannot reliably get from where they live to a job here every day. There just aren't enough seats on the trains. So we need to invest in that connectivity if we want to grow the size of the labour market, so that businesses like the one that Tom runs can access talent not just locally but from across the north of England. At the moment that just isn't possible.
We were all sat around watching the Chancellor, and you gave an audible whoop at one point. You cheered. What was that cheer for?
Well, I've known Rachel Reeves a very long time as a Leeds MP and as Shadow Chancellor, and she was always hugely supportive of us at the Northern Powers Partnership, and our chair, outgoing chair, Jim O'Neill, who's been advising her quite a lot of the time as well in opposition, really working with us on these issues to think about how you could raise northern productivity. And so I'm just really glad that she hasn't forgotten that the north of England is critical for the government's growth mission. Yes, we do need growth in that Oxford-Cambridge corridor, but in the end, if you look at cities like Hull and Middlesbrough, they're both bigger than Oxford or Cambridge. So if you want to do something about national productivity, you can't just look at those smaller, currently successful places. You've got to work out how can you make those places that currently are not as productive as they could be to be as productive as they would be in any other European country. Because the problem in this country isn't that we don't have any success, it's just that here in the north of England we don't do as well economically as our European equivalents. And if we could make our cities here as successful as their equivalents in Europe, we'd be in a much stronger position and contribute a lot more tax revenue to pay for public services like the ones for people who need them in our marginalised communities.
Tom, What does your tech company do here, and did you hear anything in it today that you thought, yes? Did you audibly whoop at any point?
I don't think I audibly whooped. Maybe I'm not an audible whooper.
Silent whooper.
I'm the founder and the CTO of the Data City. We're a 30-person tech company in Leeds. And one of the things that I think was a positive surprise to us was we read the UK government's AI action plan when it came out a few months ago. We quite enjoyed it. There were a few things that we didn't really like about it. It talked a lot about Oxford and London and nothing about Leeds and Manchester, which we were surprised by. We didn't know if there was any money behind it, so I think today it was a surprise to everyone to hear that there'd be £2 billion going behind the AI action plan. That's good for us as an AI company in Leeds. We'll find out the details of that in a few weeks' time, and I suppose that's like a common theme of the responses to the spending review is we'll find out the details in a week or two's time. We hope they're good. They seem to be not bad. So not bad is pretty good by my book.
You're, in the nicest possible way, a bit of a transport nerd, aren't you?
Yeah.
Right? What was in it today for places like Leeds?
So in the details, not a lot. There was positive sounds about Northern Powerhouse Rail. We've had previous announcements which commit to higher investment in infrastructure. We really hope that happens. I think the details again will come out in the next week or two. So nothing bad. I mean, if you think back over the last decades, what you typically get in these type of announcements is an announcement that investment in Leeds has been cancelled, and that didn't happen today. So we're happy about that.
Right. Well, Vicky, some sort of cautious optimism, maybe sort of couched in very sort of northern English terms of a bit sort of, I don't know, a bit this. I'm not really sure what to make of it all, but that is what people will be looking at going forward.
Oh, thank you very much, Jim. Or maybe it's the first time we've had a whoop of delight. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's ever happened before. Henry, thanks very much, Jim. What's your overview thought of where we are now? Because I think for people watching, you know, things are tight. There wasn't much money around. And yet, of course, you've got these big announcements about things that might be happening, things that might be being built in the Northwest and other places.
Yeah, and a lot of the charts in this document that we're going through, talking about day-to-day spending and its trajectory for the next few years, are pretty tight, tell quite a difficult story for people around the country, for different public services, for the government. That wasn't really the vibe of Rachel Reeves' speech at all, and that's because she was emphasising investment spending, capital spending. But I do think politically there was clearly a conscious choice by the government today to try to use today as a bit of a turning point on a difficult first year. It is almost a year that they've been in office now. Of course, we got the full details on the winter fuel U-turn earlier this week, and then at Cabinet just before today's events, Keir Starmer told his ministers, we're told, that this was the end of the first phase of this government, talked about marking a new chapter. I just wonder, though, if the government might risk moving a bit early to that language, because when you look in the small print of day-to-day spending, the government risks describing a picture of optimism which just might feel a bit at odds with voters' experience of Britain for a little while yet.
Yeah, and they were criticised a lot when they came in for being too gloomy, weren't they? That they were depressing everybody because they kept going on about how difficult things were. Maybe they're just trying to put that right. But I guess the problem is it does take a long time for these capital projects to start, you know, making a difference to people's lives.
And I think the obvious point is, well, they have been in office for a year. If they're now going to come back and say, well, it takes a very, very long time to build a train line, or to build a hospital, like, did they really not know that these were their priorities a year ago coming into office? Did they have to go through this whole process of, like, all this foundation? You know, they know they have made some interesting choices. They have turned the infrastructure tap towards the Midlands and the North, away from the South East. That's a potentially historic shift. They have decided to spend more on capital and move it away from departments. So there's some interesting strategic choices. Just worth noting, just with my economics hat on, just in terms of the background of the economy, you know, one of the sources of big instability has obviously been the trade war. It is worth noting that President Trump has just announced a deal has been done with China on trade, which is obviously good news in terms of that instability.
And knock-on effects for
and the knock-on effects for all of us. I think in their best reading of this, they would think we've signed these trade deals. We did get those Q1 growth figures. There are other figures that aren't going their way. They're now setting out a plan that they hope everyone can buy into. That's I think where we are. Can they deliver on it? That's the question.
Okay, let's turn now to Gareth Davies, who is Shadow Treasury Minister. Thanks for coming in to speak to us. We heard there from Jim in Leeds, whoops of delight that things were finally going to be getting built. I mean, your previous government promised a lot about levelling up and making sure that there was regeneration in lots of these parts of the country, and you never delivered on it.
Well, we did have something called the global pandemic and a war in Ukraine, which did dominate the last parliament. Absolutely right. There was funding, significant funding actually, that was deployed around the country. We had 13 investment zones that were highly successful at generating new investment. We were second in the world for R&D investment. I could go on, but I thought they inherited a terrible situation, Labour. And yet today, as you've been describing, they were very upbeat about capital investment increasing. And so I'm a little confused as to what the narrative from Labour is. If the inheritance was so bad and they were trying to fill all these black holes, how on earth can they increase spending to such levels? Be in no doubt this is born out of higher borrowing, higher debt, and there will be higher taxes to pay as a result of this. But also the fact that...
So you're against, just to be clear, you're against the extra borrowing and those capital spending announcements that they've made?
I didn't say that, but we are continuing to see...
That's implication, though, isn't it?
Not at all. Let me explain. So they have spent billions of pounds on things they did not need to spend, not least the £30 billion surrender to Mauritius of the Chagos Islands, the £9 billion of pay increases, inflation-busting pay increases with no reform, no productivity gains in return. £8 billion for GB Energy, which is an energy company that apparently doesn't produce any energy at all. There are a series of announcements that this Chancellor has made, and I haven't even started to begin with the U-turns that this Chancellor is starting to make on winter fuel payments. So that's an extra £1 billion that she's going to have to find in the autumn through tax rises. If they cave to Labour MPs on two-child benefit cap, that's £3.5 billion extra a year. So be in no doubt, tax rises, further tax rises are coming, and this government has already increased them to record levels.
But just to clarify, you are in favour of the project she was announcing, but what, you would fund them differently? You wouldn't borrow to fund them, or are you against
anybody
projects?
that watched that short statement and took away any great detail? We will comb through the detail. She's going to spend an extra
£100 billion on capital projects.
That's the overall, and if you look at our record, we increase capital spending quite significantly too, and that's a good thing. We want that, but it's on the back of an economy that is suffering because of a lack of confidence owing to this government's increased taxes on business and talking down the country for 6 months into office. Sluggish growth that has been downgraded by every international body.
Well, they point to the fact that there was higher growth in the first quarter.
There was, but they inherited the fastest growth in the G7 when we left office, which was higher growth in that quarter. It is just a quarter, but I should mention the first quarter that they were in office, it was 0% growth. The second quarter they were in office, it was 0.1% growth. It's not exactly a great record on growth in the first year for a government that said its number one mission was growth. But you are right. I think where you're going is that we do need to increase growth in our economy. And if we can increase growth to substantial levels, and you can do that by investing in infrastructure through capital spending, then you don't have to borrow as much. But we have, we have a significant amount of debt and borrowing at very high costs because the Bank of England have kept interest rates. They have cut them a few times, but they were projected to cut them even more, and they haven't. They've kept them higher, which means that we, the British taxpayer, are paying more in debt interest today than we are on an entire defence budget. I don't think that's right.
Yeah, but the taxpayer would also say that the tax burden was at a record high under your government, and the present government would argue that a lot of this is about clearing up the mess that you left, that public services were not in a good state, and lots of people watching this will have noticed that.
So taxes did have to rise because we spent £400 billion, and we can debate whether we were too generous and we provided too much support through COVID, but that was £400 billion plus another £100 billion on the back of wholesale gas prices spiking because of the war in Ukraine, and we effectively paid 50% of energy bills during that period, a very difficult cost of living period. And we believe as Conservatives in paying down our debt so that you're not overpaying interest, so that you can spend it on other things like education etc. So we did increase taxes, but we did get the economy into such a position where it was growing faster, and that enabled us in the last few months, in the last year of our time in office, to cut national insurance twice. And I'm pretty sure your viewers will remember that and notice that in their pay
but a lot of
slips.
people say that wasn't funded, was it?
It was funded.
The 4p
completely funded.
cut in national insurance for employees. Do you regret doing that?
We were delighted to be able to get the economy into a position where it's 2% inflation, it's 3.5% today.
Could the country afford that at the time?
Deficit in half, where we could cut taxes for people in work. If you cut taxes on people in work, that generates a stimulant to the economy. It says to the country, we value work, we want you to work. By the way, this was alongside a plan to reduce welfare by £12 billion. Labour have reduced it by £3 billion. We want them to go further. But you've got to stimulate growth by empowering businesses and by empowering workers. We sought to do that by cutting taxes on businesses and cutting taxes on employees when we were in a position to do so. This government are doing the opposite.
Can I just, isn't there a danger with being, and I understand why you do it, you're sort of engaged in a sort of basket case Britain narrative. The growth rate is what it was in Q1. It's been up and down. It's probably not caused by this government, and it's, you know, as is the fruits of it. You know, it doesn't really matter. But I'm really intrigued to know, like, on Monday, the Prime Minister had sat next to him, probably the most important businessman in the world right now, the Chief Executive of Nvidia, Jensen Huang, who said Britain was the envy of the world. Now, probably you guys can take some credit for some of that. And this government, doesn't that show, when you've got someone like that who controls the flow of the most important microchips in the world, a guy like that, doesn't that show, in fact, that you need to give some credit, maybe you should share some credit, for where things might go in the future? Because this is all about the future. The growth rates now are not impacted by any of these policies.
This is what's the most heartbreaking situation about this government. We do have, in this country, an amazing investable opportunity for businesses around the world. John Gray of Blackstone, Jamie Dimon, he said the same when we were in office.
If we were a basket case, they wouldn't be saying that.
I think they still want to come here because, although a lot of people are leaving, by the way, because of the fundamentals of our country. And we have great universities, we have a common language, common law, great regulators.
Yeah. Do you feel a bit bad when you're talking stuff down so much? I mean, there is an opportunity.
I'm talking
in
this
Britain.
government down. I would never talk this country down.
But the trade deals. Listen.
But how much is that going to affect? Take one.
Not a huge amount in terms of GDP.
All. I mean,
but let's be clear.
Anything.
Under the Conservatives, it was said that you couldn't do a deal with Europe like this and still do a deal with the Gulf and still do a deal with the rest of the world. They said it was impossible. They've literally just proved. You know, maybe they're not the best believers in Brexit. You guys were, and you didn't manage to sort of sew the thread through the eye of that needle.
Well, we signed trade agreements all over the world, not least entering CPTPP, which is 13% of the global GDP, some of the fastest economies of the world. So it's not true to say that we didn't sign trade agreements. We signed lots of them, and Kemi Badenoch, by the way, was the one to do it.
I have one more question for you. Yesterday, I had Kevin Hollenrake sitting in that seat who apologised, said sorry for Liz Truss's mini-budget. Would you like to say sorry?
I mean, this is a great thing. I know the BBC are really pushing this at the moment to try, it does, I'm afraid, distract away from the issues.
No, I didn't push him. He was very happy to apologise.
Yeah, no, I'm not happy to apologise. I'll apologise for that when Rachel Reeves apologises for the millions of people that had their winter fuel payments withdrawn. I think every government has issues. We certainly had an issue with Liz Truss, but that was many years ago. We have moved on. We lost an election on the back of it. Right now, Labour are pushing pensioners into poverty. They are taxing businesses so that they can't hire anybody. The growth has been downgraded. Inflation is up. Unemployment is up. And unfortunately, unfortunately, that is what people are really worried about right now.
OK, Gareth Davis, thank you very much for joining us. And Henry, if I could just come to you, more about the mood of Labour MPs, actually, because listening to that, it did sound positive, didn't it? It sounded positive about the economy. There's been the reversal on the winter fuel allowance. It was interesting that Richard Bergen, from the left of the party during Prime Minister's questions, got up and said, could you now look at the two-child benefit cap? Is that going to be an issue now, do you think, for the Chancellor?
Yes, although it does seem on the two-child benefit cap fairly inevitable that come the autumn the government is going to abolish it. I mean, they've definitely allowed the idea to fester that they are going to do so. I think what's going to be a more immediate issue for this government and its handling of its own backbenchers, indeed actually some frontbenchers, is welfare. We are expecting finally a vote on the welfare cuts that were announced by the government back in the spring. It probably is still the spring, isn't it? Anyway, a little earlier in the spring. We're finally expecting that vote to come in the next few weeks. There are a lot of
There has to be a Commons vote on that.
There has to be a vote.
Yeah.
That was actually, I think, part of the dynamic between the government and the Office for Budget Responsibility when they were trying to persuade the Office for Budget Responsibility they really could trust them that they were going to save billions of pounds from the welfare budget. That vote is still looking pretty dicey for the government. And I think the interesting...
It's incredible. They've got a massive majority, haven't they?
Well, OK, there's different versions of diciness. Is the government actually going to lose that vote? Almost certainly not. The majority is enormous. But there are sizes of rebellion which no government, however big its majority, will be willing to wear because it just looks terrible. And I think what's really interesting about the winter fuel reversal that we saw finally complete on Monday is that you are not seeing, at least in among the MPs I've spoken to so far, you're not seeing Labour MPs say, well, fair play to Rachel Reeves. She noticed our problem with that and we've got a lot of goodwill towards her now, so we're going to back away from our campaign on welfare reform. They're saying, well, with a bit of pressure, she'll fold. Yeah. And that, I think, is now the dynamic playing out within the Labour Party. And it's quite a dangerous dynamic for... I mean, a lot of governments get to a position like that eventually. They haven't been in office for even a full year yet. So I think it is one to really watch for over the next few weeks, as well received as today will have been, I think, in the chamber.
The PM sounded quite robust on that in PMQs. Didn't he?
Yeah.
He didn't sound like from the Richard Burnham question.
He has to. He has to, because it's a massive chunk of the budget. That's the distinction with winter fuel. Yeah. I mean, one of the criticisms that Labour MPs made of winter fuel originally was all that political capital for, what, £1.5 billion? Yeah. And obviously it's dramatically less now and all the political capital's been expended. Welfare reform, this government really does need to save the amount of money it says it's going to save in order to make these books balanced.
It's a huge amount of money, isn't it?
It's a huge amount of money. And also, I think Keir Starmer has made clear that he really does also believe in it as a moral question for the party of work, the Labour Party, that he believes there are too many people out of work who ought not to be. The problem is, a lot of his own MPs aren't quite in the same place.
There's another challenge here, which is I think that there are a number of long-term issues that will crystallise in this Parliament. Well, I haven't read the whole document yet, but I don't think they're mentioned. A couple of big ones. So, for example, they're going to lose if the plans on electric vehicles. Nerdy subject, but this really matters. If the electric vehicles happen, you lose the vehicle excise duty, $30 billion a year. Where are they going to get that tax money from? You would sort of expect in this document, like a little paragraph saying, maybe we'll get a, Pathfinder project to try and work out if it's going to work. At this stage, if you've got any chance of introducing this sort of stuff in the 2030s, they wouldn't go near it. They wouldn't feel like they're politically strong enough, maybe.
Well, that's one of the interesting things after winter fuel, isn't it? Is that this government dared to touch a third rail that so many previous governments would have, with their massive majority, they thought maybe we can actually grapple with a question that other governments have looked at. I don't think they'll necessarily be eager to rush into grappling with others soon, like road pricing.
Let's have a little reminder of what Rachel Reeves announced in that spending review. Big focus on the NHS. Day-to-day spending will be up 3% a year. 13,000 additional police staff. 2.6% of GDP will go on defence by 2027. £4.5 billion more a year being put aside for the core schools budget. £39 billion for affordable and social housing. She also announced £52 billion for Scotland, £20 billion for Northern Ireland, £23 billion for Wales, £280 million for the new Border Security Command and £1.2 billion a year for training and apprenticeships. Well, I'm delighted to say I'm joined now by the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey. First of all, your reaction to what you heard. Presumably capital expenditure, lots of projects there, which presumably you back?
Well, look at the details. I mean, overall, I think the Chancellor was right to make the point to start off with that the Conservatives had left the public finances in a mess, left a black hole. Our real worry, as we heard her, is she's going to leave a black hole in social care funding. And that's critical for their strategy. They're saying they're going to put right the NHS. They put a lot of money into that, and we absolutely welcome that. That's what we had been arguing for. But we'd also said that you could end up wasting a lot of that money if you don't ensure that family carers and social care is also invested in. And they have no answer on that at the moment.
So you didn't hear anything there on social care that you...
Almost nothing. They talked about the fair pay agreement. We've heard that before. And then they resorted to the Louise Casey Commission, which isn't going to report for 3 years, and they've said won't be implemented till middle of the next decade. So it's real worry that they still haven't grasped this essential thing and you can't fix the NHS unless you fix care. So we're going to be holding them to account on that. In terms of other areas, I mean, clearly defence spending increases are welcome, some of the capital that you mentioned. But
Would you like to see that go to 3%? Defence spending?
We've said that there should be a cross-party consensus and an agreement, a meeting, a discussion to try to get it to 3% quicker than they currently plan.
And to work out how you pay for that.
Exactly. That's why I think that's going to have to be cross-party. When we started looking at the details, and it is very early days, we're really worried about local government. I think that could be really hit in this settlement. And given local councils are on the brink of bankruptcy all around the country, I think that is really worrying. I think the police settlement looks like it's going to be tough to tackle the crime that we all know is out there, and certainly to deliver on what Labour promised. And then I'm worried about rural communities. DEFRA's budgets have got a hit as well. So we'll study the detail, but the big picture is they won't be able to deliver on NHS without social care.
I mean, they would argue, weren't they, that they have to make difficult choices, as you agree with them, that you think the Conservatives left the public finances in a bad way. I mean, you have sat on the front benches in coalition where you've seen difficult choices having to be made, including huge cuts to local government. And many would argue that actually that's part of the problem that we're seeing now feeding through.
Well, there are always difficult choices. I wouldn't want to shy from that. But let's give you one difficult choice that I think they've just got wrong, the increase in national insurance for employers, which is hitting lots of small businesses, I think dragging back growth, hitting lots of health providers who aren't protected by it. We had argued to raise the money that we do need for the NHS in different ways. So we talked about taking bank taxes back to what they were in 2016. That would raise 4.4 billion a year. We talked about quadrupling the digital services tax. I know Donald Trump won't like it, but who cares? I think social media giants should be paying more. We talked, for example, that there should be a gambling tax. I mean, the gambling industry, online gambling industry, is making huge profits. We reckon there's a nearly £1 billion you can get from there. So we've put forward, unlike any other party, an alternative costed agenda for delivering health and care spending without some of the, I think, growth-hitting policies that they've adopted, like the jobs tax.
But the IFS does say that actually there are consequences to those taxes that you are suggesting, that actually they, in the end, that raising of taxes does get fed through to the consumer. You make it sound like as if it won't be, because they're just big media giants. But
there may be the impact on banks and on social media giants. Of course there would be. But compared to the impact on our economy, on millions of little businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, the impact on their employees as well, because all the evidence shows it passed through to less employment and lower wages. I think it's such a bad tax policy, and I think ours is a much better approach, a much fairer approach, and it would ensure that social care investment was there.
How confident you would raise the money that you need to?
We're really confident. And let me give you another thing we do to raise the money, and that is really push up growth. So we have argued, as you know, that the UK should have a new customs union with the EU. Frontier Economics reckon that in the longer term that would raise public finances by £25 billion because it would have such a positive impact on growth. And that fundamentally is where the Chancellor's getting it wrong, just like the Conservatives did.
That involves going back into the customs union?
Well, creating a new one, actually. You have to.
Okay.
You wouldn't be the same one because we wouldn't be part of the European Union in it. But the European Union has customs union agreements with other countries that are outside the EU. That's what we're arguing for. And actually our proposal through that would mean a closer trading relationship with the EU than even the frontier economics analysis shows. And they were suggesting a really positive impact on growth is hotly surprising. So, the damage that we saw with Boris Johnson's dreadful Brexit deal, that has to be reversed. I'm afraid Labour has been way too timid on that, and that is constraining their ability.
They are moving closer, aren't they,
but
to
it's tiny
arrangement?
steps.
You'd lose the India deal, you'd lose the Gulf deal, you'd lose the America deal. Are you sure about that? I understand why you might have said that, but they've now managed to sign these other deals that are helping in the current circumstance.
Well, you talk about the trade freedom allegedly that we've had after
Not allegedly.
Brexit.
You wouldn't have got the deal with Trump.
It's only worth having if you actually get really good benefits from it. All the trade deals that the Tories signed were either rollover deals or the Australia and New Zealand deal, which we think were not really good for our country. Then you mentioned the three you've talked about. The India one is not bad, but it's actually relatively modest. And in the EU, you could have got a better deal. I know, because when I was trade minister...
They haven't got a deal with
Hold on. When I was a trade minister, I was negotiating with the EU for a trade deal with India. The people who prevented it happening were the Conservatives. And if we'd had that trade deal in the EU, we'd be having far bigger benefits with our trade with India than is on the table with Keir Starmer's trade agreement. So I'm afraid if you get into the customs union again, not only do you get a huge benefit from increasing our trade with our nearest partners, and that's, by the way, way bigger benefit than you get from the trade deals you've mentioned, but you could also negotiate better deals with India. And you may want to mention the US trade deal. I think that's a dreadful trade deal, really.
Good for the steel industry.
Well, we're no
car industry potentially.
Hold on, we're no better. In fact, we're worse off than we were this January. So, lauding that trade deal is giving in to Donald Trump.
Other countries are worse off than we are.
But if we were in the EU, I think we could negotiate. This is really important. If we were in the EU customs union, within that customs union, we could support the EU in negotiations. I think we could get a better deal as a result of that because we have more firepower.
There are various areas where you support government spending or would like them to spend more. One of the big ways the government plans to raise money is welfare cuts. There's going to be a vote on that in the House of Commons probably later this month. You've got quite a lot of MPs now. What are you going to tell them to do in that vote?
Well, first of all, we're going to look at the details of that vote. That's really, really important because there's no doubt we need to get more people into work. We're absolutely up for that. And there are some things that the government have put forward that we would support. So there's the Try First proposal, where you go into work and you don't lose your benefits, and if that work works out, then you do come off benefits. Those are the sorts of reforms that actually make perfect sense, and we've argued, because we do want to get more people off benefits into work.
But the cuts to personal independence
However, when you look at some of the PIP proposals, they will actually leave some people really badly off. Let me take one example that I've talked a lot about and asked the Prime Minister about, and that's carers. I've got an example of someone whose loved one they're looking after, they're not able to work, they'd never be able to go back into the labour market, they're going to lose their PIP, and because carers allowance, which this person claims because they're need to be full-time care for the loved one, they lose that as well. The total loss under this government's proposals to that family will be £12,000. We will oppose that.
What about the broader bringing down of the welfare bill, though? Do you think, because a lot of people are saying it's not sustainable in the way that it's due to go up, are there any cuts that you do think should be made?
Well, the question is, how do you reduce the welfare bill? It is absolutely essential we get people back to work. But, take the carers allowance again. If you reform that properly, you would get rid of the disincentive to work that's in there. So I know loads of carers. I would argue there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of carers who would like to work more, but the carers allowance system penalises them, and therefore they don't do as much work as they could do. Now, that's crazy. Let's get rid of the disincentives in the system that prevent people balancing work and care. That would be quite a big one. I also agree with the proposal from the government that you can try the work first before you lose your benefits, and that then encourages more people back to work. There's 101 things you could do to reduce the welfare budget.
The PIP proposal is raises a large chunk of the money that the government plans to then use on spending in areas that you want them to
There's
spend
not
money.
one PIP proposal. The PIP proposal has several elements to it. Some are utterly unacceptable, as I made clear. We will look and debate the others. But Charlie Mayfield, who used to be the CEO of John Lewis, he's doing a major review into how we get people back to work. He's coming up with some exciting proposals. It's commissioned by the government, by the way, but I think that is where to go. There's real opportunities to cut the welfare bill and get people back into work, which will really boost the economy and, by the way, therefore generate more tax revenues. So there is a debate on here, but we've got to get it right.
Thank you, Sir Davey. Thank you for joining us here in the studio today with your reaction to the spending review. And Henry, talking about that welfare budget, I mean, that wasn't part of today's announcement, but as you say, it does loom large, doesn't it, over what's going to happen in the next few months?
Yeah, very much so, because I think part of the political backdrop for today is that Rachel Reeves, for years, has had an unassailable position within the Labour Party, including with her colleagues, in terms of her ability to set the Labour Party's economic strategy and the way it approaches a sort of political economy. She's now the Chancellor, and that position is, shall we say, not unassailable. I mean, I'm really struck by the breadth, the ideological breadth of Labour people who will privately question her approach to the economy or indeed her long-term future as Chancellor. Now, that might be a bit overwrought on their part, but what I'm saying is that in the next few weeks, you are going to see another really big test of another really big call, a big choice, as she'd probably put it, that she made. And it is going to be very interesting, the verdict that is returned, especially by her own MPs.
And you have to think of the origin story of that welfare cut. It came because of an in-year change in the forecast, which was largely driven by a global change in the Treasury yields. And so they had to come back and find more cuts to welfare. Now, we don't quite know what direction it's going to go in by the time of the budget. But actually, the IMF, for example, suggested, maybe you should only do this once a year. You can't be just coming back every 6 months, every time, Donald Trump makes an announcement on tariffs.
They don't do it like that, do they?
Yeah. The Treasury sort of pushed back against it, but it's because actually, here's the problem. If it goes in the other direction and you want to cash in the goodies at some point in the future,
Nice to be able to do that.
You want to be able to have that
Halfway
freedom.
point.
So that's why they might not do it. But this cut that we're talking about was the direct result of the way in which her fiscal rules actually manifested themselves in policy terms. And so it's interesting, that's really interesting. And if you stack this up now, if you have, I think the billion on a winter fuel allowance, it's manageable. You say you could deal with that in the budget. You add in this, if his intelligence is right, I'm not going to doubt it, if it's the full thing, that's $3.5 billion. I mean, there are other sort of middle way changes you could do, 3-child. And then on top of that, there are other reforms where they may get the taste for the forcing the U-turn. These things tend to be quite viral, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's right. It's an authority question.
Let's get some more political reaction now. I am joined from College Green by Stephen Flynn, who is the Westminster leader of the SNP, and by Adrian Ramsey, the Green Party co-leader. Hello to both of you. Stephen, if I could come to you first. What's your reaction to what the Chancellor had to say? There was quite a lot of mention of Scotland and some of the things that will be some of the investment that is coming your way. You must be pleased.
Yeah, I mean, she's trying to steal my thunder by being so talkative about Scotland, my favourite topic, of course. Look, I think if you're a family right now who are struggling under the cost of living crisis with massive energy bills, or you're a disabled person who knows that their personal independence payments are about to be cut, or you're a business who's watching this knowing that you can't employ staff because of the national insurance increase that has crippled your ability to grow as well, you'll be listening to the Chancellor telling you that everything is fantastic and thinking she's living in an absolutely different world to you. And they'd probably be right to think that, because whilst Rachel Reeves has made a big play of capital investment here, when it comes to day-to-day spending across many of her government departments that she's responsible for, there's going to be cuts. There's either going to be cuts or there's going to have to be tax rises later in the year, and that remains to be seen.
So you would like to see her spending more, and if so, how would you fund that?
Well, of course, if you're looking at the NHS, for instance, if I've picked the Chancellor up correctly, I think she said there's a 3% year-on-year increase. In comparison to what's came in the past under previous Labour governments, that's significantly smaller. Now, I'm quite open about the fact that I think the government should be looking at the likes of income tax, but what it should be doing is looking for growth, and it gets growth through migration, gets growth through more people of working age in the economy, and it gets growth by closer alignment to the European Union. We've edged towards that final point, but we've not quite got there in the way that I would like to see. So growth's important, but this budget doesn't appear to outline how that is going to happen, how she is going to be able to meet the expectations of a public which wanted change, but up till now has been let down.
I mean, you have the ability, don't you, as the Scottish Government, to raise taxes. Would you go further and do that?
Well, of course, in Scotland we have a progressive taxation system at the moment, which allows us, I think it's another £1.5 billion of revenue to spend on the NHS, something which is opposed by opposition parties in Holyrood. If that was replicated by Rachel Reeves, you'd be talking tens of billions of pounds. I think it's about £17 billion, actually, if I recall correctly, that she would have available to her to spend on the priorities of the public, which is ultimately right now about dealing with the cost of living crisis, making sure energy bills are coming down and making sure that businesses can do what they can to grow the economy. She's been a barrier to that up to now, and I'm afraid that from listening to that today, there isn't any change in that regard.
When it comes to the two-child benefit cap, I think you have announced that you are going to scrap that in Scotland, but it hasn't yet been implemented. Is that the case? And if so, when might you implement it? When could people know that they're going to get that extra money?
Yeah, so contrary to Westminster, the First Minister was clear a number of months ago that we would have a different position from the UK government with regards to the winter fuel payment, but also in respect of the two-child cap, just as we do with the bedroom tax, because of course people in Scotland don't pay that, whilst vulnerable people in England do, and the Scottish Government will be implementing that as quickly as possible. Obviously it's reliant upon data from the Department for Work and Pensions, but what a stark contrast between that positive agenda to lift children out of poverty and a UK government which doesn't want to change its mind on the two-child benefit cap. Indeed, I think there was a vote just last year which I helped to put through in Parliament that saw Labour MPs kicked out the party for voting against the party line in relation to that. So if they want to combat child poverty, they should be doing that, but they should be following other policies the Scottish Government have put in place, like the Scottish child payment. And we put forward figures from the House Commons Library which would indicate that some 2 million children could be lifted out of poverty across the UK if the Labour Party were to replicate our endeavours that we've already put in place in Holyrood. That's the sort of stuff that the public expect from a Labour Party, but up till now they've been let down.
Stephen Flynn from the SNP, thank you very much indeed for giving your reaction to the spending review. Let's move now to Adrian Ramsey from the Green Party. And NHS spending, extra NHS spending, is something that you've been very keen on. Are you happy with what Rachel Reeves has had to say today?
Well, I've been keen on highlighting that people around the country are facing their health services severely overstretched. People can't get access to a dentist when they need one. The hospital corridors are full of patients. And at the same time, our schools are seeing real terms budget cuts. Head teachers I speak to are saying they don't know what they're going to do to make the books balance. They may have to look at making teachers redundant. This is just an awful situation to be in, especially when you also see some of the most vulnerable people in society facing cuts to their disability benefits that they rely on for the basics every day. And what we heard from the Chancellor today doesn't answer those questions, because your own analysis from the BBC has made clear that under Rachel Reeves' figures, from 2026 we will see a sharp decline in funding of public services at a time when we need to be increasing that funding. And that's why the Green Party's been saying there are options for the Chancellor here. She could be asking the very richest in society, the multimillionaires, the billionaires, to pay a modest amount more in tax in a way that would raise tens of billions to invest in those crucial services so that we're not seeing our health, our schools severely overstretched and some of the most vulnerable people in society really suffering.
I mean, there is some evidence, and the IFS are one of those that say that actually a wealth tax, although lots of people think it can raise revenue, it is actually pretty hard to implement. People do find their way around it. This is not something that you can actually rely on in terms of extra spending money.
Well, what's interesting is the growing demands for a wealth tax across different parties in Parliament, including lots of Labour backbench MPs supporting the Green Party's call for a wealth tax. lots of academic experts who've looked at how it works in different countries and how it can raise you that crucial revenue that you need for investing in public services, supporting the most vulnerable. And I'm now working with a group called the Patriotic Millionaires, who say we've benefited from Britain, from the investment that we've had in our country's infrastructure, in our public services, and now we want to give back that bit more that enable us to have a fairer society, that enable us to have access to health services when everyone needs them, for our schools to be properly funded, for disabled people to not be left in the lurch. That's the sort of future for Britain that I want to see, that restores pride and hope.
Okay, Adrian Ramsey from the Green Party, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's have a recap and a look now at some of the changes that have been announced by Rachel Reeves today in terms of the changes in day-to-day spending. And that's a comparison between 2025-26, so this financial year, and to 2028-29. So if we look at the science, innovation and technology area, that's 7.4%, which is an increase. Health and social care will go up 2.8% over that period. Justice, 1.8%. Defence, 0.7%. Energy, security and net zero, 0.5%. Then if you turn to the Foreign Office, there's a drop of 6.9%, a drop for transport of 5%, Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, a drop of 2.7%, and for the Home Office, a drop of 1.7%, and then Culture, Media and Support, also a drop of 1.2%. So Faisal, if we look at those, that does demonstrate, doesn't it, how the fact that the NHS is getting more, that there is a squeeze there for other departments. Now, some of them look quite striking. So the Foreign Office, that looks huge. That's partly, is it, to do with the overseas aid budget?
That is the overseas aid budget coming down because it's now the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. We put all of those numbers to Darren Jones, and he sort of, I think the key one was the Home Office coming down 1.7%. He said, and obviously we've just got to help. These numbers haven't been checked by the OBR, and so we have to sort of unpack them and unpick them a bit. And he said that was explained by the fact that they just won't be using the asylum hotels, and that's the cost saving. That's also a policy.
It is a lot of money, isn't it?
It's a policy they want to lean into. So they have a sort of explanation for each of the bits here. Let me just tell you what that number is very specifically. It's the current day-to-day spending over the next 3 years. You'll get different numbers if you include the capital, or indeed if you focus on the capital, which is not wholly a relevant thing to do right now, given that a lot of the spending review was focused on capital. So, for example, if you look at the Energy Department, they have massive increases in capital spending.
And that's investment for projects such as nuclear power.
GB Energy and all that sort of stuff. So they're a big winner, although it wouldn't show up in that money.
Yeah.
And so then the other thing that is being done is that you add up phase 1 of the spending review, which is what's already been decided, with that, which is phase 2. So you've got a 5-year picture and the capital, and you add in the current, and then you get that big overall number of 2.3%, which is why the Chancellor wants to say, unlike when Ed Davey was in Cabinet, which is what she compared it with, this is definitely not austerity.
So she's saying, well, I'm putting spending up, because she's adding together all sorts of different pots.
Yes, and that's not, I can see why she would say, well, I had decided for this year to put in a great amount of money in this year, so I'm going to continue looking at that. I'm also going to continue capital because that's fundamentally my strategy. So there are legitimately different ways of cutting this pie, but clearly there is a squeeze in other departments as a result of the priority on capital, the priority on health, and the priority on defence. That is what we're seeing. That is the choice they have made.
OK, thank you. Let's speak now to Richard Tice, who is the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, who joins us today. Thanks for joining us. What is your reaction to what you heard from Rachel Reeves today? An awful lot of projects, an awful lot of infrastructure spending. Is that something that you welcome?
Well, what we've heard from the Chancellor is an absolute splurge of spending that I fear much of it will be wasted on pay settlements with no productivity requirements, tens of billions on daft projects like carbon capture that nobody thinks works. There's no proof that it makes any difference whatsoever. And I'm already seeing this all over the place. So when I challenged the Chancellor in the Chamber, I did actually give us some good news. In the 10 councils that Reform are already controlling and running, we're identifying savings of tens of millions of pounds already on running costs and on capital costs And that's the smart thing to do, is to start saving wasteful spending, smarter spending, and then you can invest that in frontline services and get better bang for your bucks. But this Chancellor is allowing borrowing to soar, hundreds of billions more of government debt that everybody's got to pay the price for. The price of government borrowing is going up, inflation's up, unemployment is up, and we heard in the last couple of days, 250,000 jobs have disappeared down a huge crater of a loss of confidence in this Labour government just since the blunder budget last October.
I mean, Rachel Reeves would argue that she is borrowing more, but she's borrowing it to invest and she will get a return on that money. Your spending proposals, if we just look at one tax cut proposal on its own, is going to cost between 50 and 70 billion pounds a year. So you would be borrowing for tax cuts.
The problem is you're relying on completely fake information from the useless IFS. That number's about.
So how much will it cost?
That number's about 40 billion, and you save that by, for example, stop paying voluntary interest in the Bank of England to enrich city institutions on the printed money, the quantitative easing. Stop doing quantitative tightening. I've written to the Governor of the Bank of England. That
there
can
are
save
some
10,
who
hang on,
think that won't work.
No, the other central banks are not doing this. It is negligent of our central bank to be doing this. If you scrap net stupid zero, you save tens of billions every single year.
But a lot of that is private sector. No, but that's an important point. You do talk about this a lot.
I do.
That saving, a lot of the spending on net zero is from private individuals and the private sector. That's not government money.
Literally, in the hospital, in my constituency, the Pilgrim Hospital, they're now spending £23 million ripping out a perfectly good heating system to replace it with a net stupid zero compliance system. That is a grotesque waste of money, and that is happening across the whole country. And if you look at the Climate Change Committee's projections for spending on net zero over the next decade, it sets out the graph, and there are tens of billions every year of public sector money. That should stop. It's a grotesque waste of taxpayers' cash.
But when you talk about the bank reserves as well, the National Institute for Economic and Social Research has said that what you're suggesting is very dangerous, it's likely to be counterproductive, and it would imperil financial stability.
So why are other central banks doing it across Europe? Why is the ECB doing it? Why is no other central bank doing quantitative tightening? And why do two former deputy governors of the Bank of England agree with me? Why do lots of other senior economists,
have you had a
including the
response?
Financial Times...
You've written, haven't you, to the governor of the Bank of England?
I'm just responding to your point. Actually, many journalists, economists, commentators, former deputy governors of the Bank of England agree with me. Tice is right on the principle. You can negotiate about the quantum, but I'm negotiating on behalf of the taxpayer. I think the sum should be zero. Stop enriching city bankers, and then you can invest it on the front line in healthcare and the like, for example. And yes, so I've written to the Governor of the Bank of England. I'm looking forward to a response. It's only Wednesday. No doubt he'll be thinking about it. I'm looking forward to hearing from them.
Would you say that your party is now a big state party? You have said that you want to see, for example, and you've seen that you welcome the reversal of the winter fuel allowance cut. Do you think the state should be doing more or less?
We want a smart state. So we want to motivate work. We want to motivate risk-taking, deregulate, so have smart regulations, not massive daft regulations. And that's how you get growth. You can't tax your way out of a crisis, as this Chancellor thinks you can do. No, you've got to grow your way out of a crisis. The tragedy at the moment is entrepreneurs, business owners, risk takers, they're fleeing the country. They've had enough. It's not worth it in this country under this disastrous Labour regime.
Richard, hello. Faisal Islam here, BBC Economics Editor. You think you can get £35 billion out of the Bank of England through this method? That the bank, the director's given a speech today and sort of implicitly criticised your plan as raising volatility. I mean, doesn't this risk... Does this risk a sterling crisis? 35 billion is a hell of a lot of money.
I repeat the point. Other central banks around the world are not doing what this Bank of England is doing. And guess what? They're doing fine. They're not doing quantitative tightening. The number now, because interest rates have fallen, because they've stupidly done some quantitative tightening, imposing tens of billions of losses already on the taxpayer, the number now is about 25, 26 billion pounds. This is absurd. This is our cash that is enriching bankers and city institutions, and I'm really angry about it.
So to be clear, you would extract from an unwilling Bank of England, an independent Bank of England, £35 billion a year. That's your plan to fill in any gaps in your budget?
That's part of our plan. You scrap net zero, as we've touched on.
And you scrap the independence of the Bank of England as well, yeah?
No, hang on. No, that's not what I said at all, and it's very clear in my letter. Right? The independence of the Bank of England on setting interest rates, on ensuring market stability, that's one point. But making massive strategic decisions about taxpayers spending taxpayers billions of pounds on voluntarily paying interest on printed money, or voluntarily, foolishly doing quantitative tightening. That is a strategic decision that should be debated and held to account by people in Parliament, elected officials, not unelected officials.
And Richard, just one final quick question and answer from you. There will be a vote on cuts to welfare coming up. How are your MPs going to vote?
We'll look at the details of that and make our decision at the time. I haven't got that in front of me, so I can't make a judgment here live on TV, I'm afraid.
OK, Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, thank you very much for joining us. And just for a final word, your overall view of what you've heard today, a lot of it was expected. How do you think it's going to go down on the Labour backbenches?
I think pretty well. I think they'll be happy with what the Chancellor said in the House of Commons. I think as the reality of this document settles in, though, it might have a sort of rougher reception. The big debate about economics in the Labour Party at the moment, including among Labour MPs and including privately among some government ministers, is whether the Chancellor ought to increase taxes or change her borrowing rules in the autumn, and I don't think she's closed down that debate today at all.
OK, thank you very much indeed to Faisal and to you, Henry. That's all for today, but I'll be back with even more tomorrow from Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and on the iPlayer. Thank you very much for watching.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves sets out her new plan for spending with a promise to invest in security, health and growing the economy.
In this spending review, total departmental budgets will grow by 2.3% a year in real terms. Compare that to the Conservative choice of austerity.
LA's overnight curfew has just come to an end. Police say they carried out mass arrests of those who defied it. 17 officers are injured in a second night of clashes in Ballymena in Northern Ireland following protests over an alleged sexual assault on a teenage girl. And the sun's south pole closer than we've ever seen it before. The remarkable new footage unravelling the mysteries of our closest star. Hello, I'm Anita McVeigh and welcome to Verified Live. It's a hugely significant day here in the UK as the Chancellor Rachel Reeves has been setting out how taxpayers' money will be spent by the government until the end of the decade. We're going to have lots of analysis over the coming hours. And right now, let's cross straight to my colleague, Rajini Vaidyanathan, who's at Westminster for us. Rajini.
Thanks very much, Anita. Well, it's been a busy day here in Westminster as the UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves delivered her spending review, which essentially sets out what spending is going to go to each government department until the end of the next decade. It's important to say that this is not about any tax-raising measures. It's all about how the existing funds are going to be distributed, and different government departments have come out better than others. Well, let's take you through some of the main points. First of all, the Chancellor confirmed that total departmental spending will grow by 2.3% over inflation per year. She said that spending on the NHS would rise by 3% a year after inflation and she confirmed £39 billion for social and affordable housing. The Chancellor also committed to a boost in defence spending and pledged to end asylum hotels in the next 4 years. Rachel Reeves said she was rejecting austerity. Our first report comes from our political correspondent, Leila Nathu.
When will we feel better off, Chancellor?
Soon, fingers crossed, is what she's thinking. Rachel Reeves leaving Downing Street this morning for Parliament for a crucial moment in her time in charge of the country's finances.
Yes, you like that?
Earlier, cabinet ministers met to hear how much money their departments have been allocated for the coming years, both for spending and investment. Some have done better than others. Trade-offs unavoidable, with limited room for manoeuvre in economic terms.
I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves.
In the Commons this lunchtime, the Chancellor set out her stall.
We are renewing Britain. But I know that too many people in too many parts of our country are yet to feel it. This government's task, my task as Chancellor, and the purpose of this spending review is to change that, to ensure that renewal is felt in people's everyday lives, in their jobs and on their high streets. The priorities of this spending review are the priorities of working people.
She's giving day-to-day spending across all departments an above-inflation boost and said she was taking a different approach to that of the Tories.
In contrast to our increase of 2.3%, they cut spending by 2.9% per year in 2010. So let's be clear. Austerity was a destructive choice for the fabric of our society.
There are cuts to some departments, including Transport and the Foreign Office, but schools and defence have been given an uplift, and the NHS was the big winner.
This Labour government is making a record cash investment in our National Health Service, increasing real terms day-to-day spending by 3% per year for every single year of this spending review. An extra £29 billion per year for the day-to-day running of our health service.
The Chancellor also set out areas for longer-term investment, around £14 billion to build the Sizewell C nuclear power station in Suffolk, more than £15 billion on bus, tram and train networks in the north of England and the Midlands, £86 billion for research in the science and technology sector by the end of the Parliament, and £39 billion towards affordable homes in England.
The Chancellor is betting that voters and those within her own party who've recently questioned her judgment will be convinced by big numbers on investing for the longer term in the hope of generating growth over time. There is more spending money in some priority areas, but these are a delicate set of decisions that Rachel Reeves knows will define what this Labour government can do.
Opposition parties gave their response to the Chancellor's announcement.
This is the spend now, tax later review. Because the Right Honourable Lady knows she will need to come back here in the autumn with yet more taxes. And a cruel summer of speculation awaits.
We are still not seeing the scale of ambition needed to turn the country around. We welcome the announcement of investment in the NHS, but on its own, it won't work unless the government invests in social care too.
Rachel Reeves and her Treasury team are telling us what the state will provide under Labour and how much that will cost. Big choices that they say marks a new phase of this government. Leila Nathu, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, in many ways, what we heard from the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, was not surprising. Many of the announcements have been heavily trailed in the weeks and days before. But let's break some of it down nonetheless with our economics correspondent, Andy Verity. So, Andy, things like a boost in defence spending, a boost in NHS, even the Home Office not doing as well as some of the other departments. We expected a lot of that. It had already been trailed. What surprises were there, if any, then?
Well, I think there were nuances really. So you had a slightly higher real terms increase in overall departmental spending than we thought there'd be. 2.3% was slightly more than most people expected. And there were other things like, for example, the effect on households of the various changes. So I've just got some new analysis through which shows that if you're in the bottom half of the income distribution, so the bottom half of the population by income, then you tend to have benefited to the tune of about £1,200 a year from the increases to public services, the boost to public services, but lost to the tune of about £400 or £500 a year from higher taxes or reduced benefits, like, for example, the withdrawal from some people at least of the winter fuel payment. If you're in the top 10th, those in a traditional Labour way are the people who've been hit hardest. So in a way, this is quite interesting how traditional Labour have been in who they've hit. So according to the Treasury's own model, and we should say it's a Treasury's model, the wealthiest will benefit from better public services to the tune of about £700 to £750 a year, but they'll lose to the tune of more than £1,000 a year from changes to benefits and taxes.
OK, so that analysis just coming in there, Andy. There's a lot to get through, but we've been looking at questions that the audience wants answers to, and I've just been casting an eye over them. And something that a lot of people have been searching about today, we may as well get this one out of the way because it sort of underpins all of what we're doing, is a lot of people are asking, what is the spending review?
What is the spending? A good question. You know, what's the difference between that and a budget and an autumn statement? Well, normally you have two what we call fiscal events where they make spending and tax decisions a year. And actually, there's only supposed to be one now, the budget, which happens in the autumn where you get tax decisions being made. This is about spending, not tax. So no decisions here to raise taxes or cut taxes. It's about a strategic thing. It's more of a medium to long-term view, setting out the government spending plans over the rest of the Parliament rather than just in the coming year. So that's the big difference.
And you're economics correspondent, but economics and politics are always intertwined, especially when we're standing in front of that building, Andy. How much of this matches up to what the Labour Party during the election was promising?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, certainly they've promised to boost spending in real terms on health, and that's what they're doing here, by some 2.8%. And that, unfortunately, is at the expense of boosting spending by substantial amounts on other departments. So although you're getting an uplift in defence of about 0.7% per year over the course of the next Parliament, other departments like the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs are seeing their budgets fall. Now, of course, that wasn't something that was promised in the manifesto. And what you constantly have here is a trade-off between political costs and benefits and economic costs and benefits. So with the winter fuel payment, for example, that was only £1.2 billion to fix it. And I think eventually the government's clearly taken the view that the political costs they were paying, the price they were paying there, wasn't worth it for the saving that they would make. And it was better just to rescind 3/4 of it and make do without £1.2 billion, and a lot of their supporters are a lot happier.
Let's pick up on that. You say, for example, with the winter fuel U-turn, relatively speaking, it was a small amount of money when you look at government budget. So let's just break down, say, defence and health. Are they getting huge boosts?
Well, I mean, it's a substantial boost for health. It's going up from about 180-something billion now to more than 200 billion in the current financial year, and it will go up by more than inflation in each of the coming years. So yes, it is a substantial boost, but on the other hand, compare it to what it was, say, in the so-called austerity decade, when in fact health spending went up by about 3 or 4% each year, and it's actually a bit less.
OK. Andy, you'll be with us throughout the course of the afternoon. Thank you very much for answering questions, basic and complicated. We appreciate it, and we'll be back with you in a moment. So let's go from our economics correspondent to our political correspondent, Alex Forsyth, who's in the building behind me, in the thick of it in Central Lobby. So, Alex, just tell us what the reaction is from politicians where you are.
Well, it's interesting because it's, as you said, a lot of this we actually knew about in advance, because in the week or so in the run-up to today's spending review, we've had that drip of announcements about the things that the government wanted to get out there in the public. So the details about investment in public transport, it details about investment in that big nuclear programme and the new nuclear plant Sizewell C. And then, of course, this morning we heard about that investment in affordable and social housing. So some of the really big ticket items in this spending review were out in advance. But I think what has developed through the course of the day, and after we heard Rachel Reeves give her speech on her feet in this building, was the story that the government is attempting to tell. And that was really a little bit, we've taken the difficult decisions to allow us to do what we're doing now, and we think this is going to make things better. That is really the government's argument. And as you were discussing there with Andy Verity, some of this is much more about longer term investment in projects like roads and buildings that might take a while to come to fruition, but the government thinks that's the right approach and that that's going to get the economy growing. But then there are those questions about when you really dig into the detail of the day-to-day spending, what this means for some government departments and whether some areas of spending are going to really be squeezed, and then the question about the impact that might have on public services services. Now, the Conservatives' response, the Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride was on his feet just after Rachel Reeves, and what he was saying was that the government is borrowing, because it is borrowing to fund some of the investment spending that it's outlined, and raising that question mark about whether or not there could be tax rises when the Chancellor comes back in the autumn for her budget, the big fiscal event of the year. Now, the government, of course, hasn't said that it's going to put taxes up come the budget, but it is the question that the Conservatives are posing, and I think that is increasingly going to become an attack line from them.
Now, Alex, I put Andy on the spot a little bit by going through some of the questions that our audience are asking in the aftermath of the spending review. I hope you don't mind, I'm going to do the same. A lot of people are asking, quite simply, what is austerity? Can you explain to our viewers what it is? Because we heard Mel Stride talking about austerity, we heard the Chancellor talking about austerity. Of course, it's a bit of a political football, isn't it?
Yeah, and it is a term that is often used to describe the period of time from 2010 onwards, when David Cameron and George Osborne, cast your mind back to them, when they were Prime Minister and Chancellor, when they came into government and they said we have to really rein in public spending. And that did see some areas, particularly places like local councils, see their budgets cut. That is what is often pointed to as the period of austerity. Now, there's been a question mark, particularly from Labour backbench MPs, about whether or not this government, the Labour government, and the choices that it was going to make when it came to spending would effectively amount to another period of austerity, where the government departments seeing budgets shrink, and that therefore had an impact on the public services that people and communities rely on. It was really notable that Rachel Reeves, in her speech today, she said austerity was destructive and she wasn't going back there. And then she outlined all of the areas that this government was spending money on. And as Andy Verity was explaining, it is right to say that overall government spending is going up. But I come back to that point. You have to break it down and really dig in the detail, which our team of experts are doing throughout the course of the afternoon, and they'll get all the details up on the BBC News website. But that is where we will really learn about the impact on specific government departments and the consequences for public services.
Indeed, Alex. One more with you as our political expert. I touched on it with Andy, but of course, how much does this marry up with Labour's manifesto promises in the election last year?
Well, this government has said that it is mission-driven, to use the lingo of some of ministers. And what you heard today from the Chancellor were a couple of areas where they are really choosing to focus. She repeated them time and time again during the course of the speech that she gave. And they were about security, health, and economic growth. And what she was trying to say were the decisions that they were making were focused on those areas, which is why we saw an increase in health spending and defence spending. And then we saw those investment decisions she made, with the government claims is going to help get the economy moving, which is a real focus for them, because they argue that if you do that, then ultimately you end up with more money for public services in the long term. So I think that framing is really interesting, because we can see now where the government's focus is. It is a simple statement and perhaps an obvious one to say, but what really matters is whether it works.
Indeed, only time will tell. I'm using a cliche there, but it's a useful one. Thank you very much, Alex Forsyth, joining us from Central Lobby. Alex is just in the building behind me. We'll be back with Alex throughout the course of the afternoon. Well, let's drill down on one particular area, because of course there's so many different government departments who have been impacted. There have been winners. We've talked about defence and health, the two of the bigger winners, and there have been departments that have lost out a little bit. Home Office, for example, and the Foreign Office, who didn't get an increase in their budgets, akin to what we saw with the NHS, for example. Well, now let's take a closer look at education. I'm joined now on the line by Daniel Kabede, the General Secretary of the National Education Union. Welcome to BBC News, Daniel. We heard a range of announcements, investment in apprenticeships, for example. Of course, we heard the announcement earlier in the week about free school meals. Just take us through what you think are the most significant for education from what we heard from the Chancellor.
So we really applaud and welcome the Chancellor's decision to extend free school meals to all children in receipt of universal credit. That will make a material difference. We're pleased to see £2 billion to be devoted to school buildings. And we are heartened to see an end to austerity in education but it is just a modest increase. I think we have to be realistic about what the Chancellor is committed to in terms of education spending. It's dependent on the OBR's predictions for inflation and for wage growth remaining true. And of course, those have been very turbulent in recent years, but it will return school spending power back to levels when Boris Johnson left office, not to the 2010 levels that we desperately need to see in education. You know, we still have a very deep crisis in education in terms of recruitment and retention. We've got the largest class sizes in Europe currently. So whilst we are pleased to see an increase in school spending, we do still have some concerns about whether it does go far enough, considering what we are dealing with in education today.
You talk about recruitment and retention. I'm just going to pick up on one announcement from the Chancellor saying an extra £615 million this year to partially fund a 4% pay rise for teachers in England, with schools expected to fund a quarter of the rise through, I quote, improved productivity. What did you make of that?
Well, it's very difficult because after 14 years of Conservative austerity, no school leader or teacher can identify cuts to be made in schools. Now, that's not to say that there aren't system-wide efficiencies to be found because of academisation and privatisation of education. These things have been incredibly wasteful. We can have a cap on excessive CEO pay, for example, a national energy contract. We can move away from supply agencies towards supply pools. These things would be system-wide efficiencies that we can find. The school-based ones, it's incredibly difficult. I mean, what we have noticed around the spending review is that the funding increases will be front-loaded. So whilst there is going to be some efficiencies to be found in schools this year, it looks like that you know, in 25, 26, it will be much better. 26, 27, sorry, much better. But yes, overall, we still are in a remit where we need to see much greater investment in education.
OK, Daniel Kebede, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on the area of education. Well, throughout the course of the day, we will, of course, be taking a closer look at some of the key government departments to see how their spending plans have fared in today's announcement. And more crucially, we will get some analysis, because in a short moment, I will be joined by Paul Johnson of the IFS. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Welcome back to our live coverage of the UK Chancellor's spending review, where the government's outlined the choices it's made about where to allocate cash over the next 3 years. In its spending review, well, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has promised to invest in security, health and in growing Britain's economy. Now, there have been some departments who've done very well out of this, the NHS, for example, and defence. Others, like the Home Office and the Foreign Office, haven't come out as well as they have, for example. But we're going to break it all down now. Joining me now is Paul Johnson, the Director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the IFS. And anyone who follows economics knows that after something like this, this is the post-match analysis you want. You want Paul, and we've got Paul. So, Paul, first of all, your 30-second take.
It's pretty much what we expected. The NHS gets quite a lot, 3% a year, year-on-year growth. but that means there's not much left to share among everybody else. And that's why we've got a number of departments, Department for Environment, for example, seeing cuts over the next 3 years. The schools budget actually looks pretty tight to me, I have to say. The Ministry of Defence budget is sticking at 2.5% of national income after 2027. I think there's going to be pressure to increase that further over that period. And then, of course, what we heard from Rachel Reeves was announcement after announcement after announcement about the money that she's going to spend on capital projects, energy projects, rail projects, and so on. A lot of that money already allocated over the last couple of years, and quite a lot to come.
One thing that I think some of our viewers might want to know is, so we know this is not about raising money, this is about how to allocate the funds that are already there. How much can those funds change according to the political situation globally? So there's forecasts that have been made, but for example, we don't know what's happening with the president in the US and tariffs. So could that change the calculations?
It certainly could. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world economy at the moment. And the Chancellor, she says her own fiscal rules, she says they're ironclad, she won't deviate from them. Well, the problem there is with that level of economic uncertainty and the fact that she's barely meeting her rules by the smallest amount it's possible to meet them, actually. That means any change for the negative in the forecasts will throw her off course, and that will mean, if that happens in the budget, I think the only thing that they can then give is more tax rises. And I'm not saying that's inevitable in any sense, but I think there's a 50-50 shot at least that we'll get tax rises in the budget in order to pay for all this.
Tariff turmoil could equal tax, but who knows?
Combination of tariff turmoil and the fact that interest rates on government debt are increasing, and actually the fact that the forecasts back in the spring were pretty optimistic.
Okay, let me just ask you about something you just referred to there, Rachel Reeves's fiscal rules. For those of us who don't live and breathe economics like you, in 30 seconds, what are her fiscal rules?
Well, she's got two of them. One is that looking forward, she should be borrowing only to invest. In other words, she can borrow for the capital project she's talking about, but not for day-to-day spending. She's meeting that, as I say, by the tiniest imaginable margin. So any slight change and she starts to miss that. And the other rule is that on a particular definition of debt, and a very generous one to her, debt should be falling at the end of the Parliament as a fraction of national income. Debt is very high at the moment. We're paying an enormous amount of interest on that debt. And again, it is barely falling at the end of the Parliament. So that's why I say any changes to the economic outlook for the negative, and she starts to miss those rules.
So not that much room for manoeuvre?
I mean, no room for manoeuvre.
No room for manoeuvre, okay.
Zero.
Another question some people have been talking about, the word austerity. We were discussing that with our political correspondent Alex Forsyth. There are some people who would argue that she's just spending too much. She'd argue that's to boost investment and growth.
Yeah, well, we're certainly not in a world of austerity. Spending went up a lot last year, particularly, and through this year, and she talked a lot about the additional spending over this Parliament, but it's worth saying the countervailing part of that is a lot more borrowing than was in the plans a year ago, and also significantly more tax. So this government has decided to focus on particularly that capital side of spending, and they're willing to borrow quite a lot more in order to fund it.
Okay, Paul Johnson, thank you very much for taking us through so much, very succinctly. It's always great to have Paul and his analysis on a day like this. Well, if you're watching here in the UK at 5:30, we will be joined by a number of more experts, I should say, for a special Your Voice, Your BBC to answer any questions you might have about the spending review. Get in touch with us, email bbcyourvoice@bbc.co.uk, or you can send us a WhatsApp 07756 165 803. That's it for the moment here from College Green. I'm Regina Vaidyanathan. Stay with us.
Hello there. Warm and humid is the forecast for the next few days for all areas, but particularly so for England and Wales. But this combination of heat and humidity is likely to set off some heavy and thundery downpours, which will be pushing up from the south. Now, we've got high pressure over the near continent, drawing this warm and humid air from France, and low pressure, it's weather fronts out in the Atlantic trying to make inroads and destabilising the atmosphere. So tonight, most places will be dry, warm and muggy. We'll start to see some heavy showers and thunderstorms pushing up across the Channel Islands into southwest England and South Wales. Some of these could be heavy, risk of some localised flooding. Double figure values for all. So we start Thursday off on a warm and humid note. We'll have showers and thunderstorms from the word go across southwest England. These pushing into Wales, Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland as we head into the afternoon. And again, some of them could be heavy with the risk of some localised flooding. But elsewhere, it stays dry and sunny with some variable cloud. Top temperatures again around the mid-20s and feeling humid. Friday, probably the peak of the heat, especially the southeast of England. We'll see some sunshine here, scattered thundery downpours developing pretty widely, spreading their way northwards through the course of the day. Top temperatures, high 20s in the southeast. We could hit the 30 Celsius mark, low 20s further north and west. But as we head into the weekend, the Atlantic winds out, it turns cooler and fresher with temperatures returning closer to the seasonal norm. Showers in the north, sunnier in the south.
This is better known to you and me as a flying car.
This is not your typical farm. It's food of the future.
A highly secure facility that monitors foreign governments' attempts to destabilise democracy.
Why are we so suited and booted for this task?
The idea is to learn more about how volcanoes behave so that we can better predict eruptions.
This is a prime location for big companies to show us their latest products.
I'm going to go in and have a look. Using technology, distribution is now 98% efficient.
This is the potential of electric power in the marine industry. Can we fire it up?
Once we close the doors behind us, no one can hear you scream. I better not touch it anymore.
This is one of the most incredible things I've ever done.
I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Tech Now. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
This programme asks plain questions with the help of the unrivalled range of BBC journalists right across the world. And gathered here in this building, I'll also draw on my frontline experience that helps me know who to talk to and who to listen to. Meaning our analysis is objective, unbiased, and I promise you with absolutely no spin. That's why we call our programme Unspun World.
Watch on BBC iPlayer.
What does it take to become a top opera star?
I'm on a mission to find out how opera is trying to attract new audiences and reinvent itself.
A lot of people find crossing the threshold of an opera house quite difficult.
It's very, very important that we expose our young talent to the best that the business has to offer.
That's Take Me to the Opera with me, Zainab Badawi. Watch on iPlayer.
This is BBC News, the headlines for you. The UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves sets out her new plan for spending with a promise to invest in security, health and growing the economy. LA emerges from a partial curfew. The US Marines are staged to respond to further protests amid President Trump's crackdown on immigration. Donald Trump says America's trade deal with China is done, claiming the relationship between the two countries is excellent. 17 officers are injured in a second night of clashes in Ballymena in Northern Ireland following protests over an alleged sexual assault on a teenage girl. And the sun's south pole closer than we've ever seen before. The remarkable new footage unravelling the mysteries of our closest star. Hello, I'm Anita McVeigh and you're with Verified Live on BBC News. Now with all the latest sports news, here's Tanya Arnold. Over to you, Tanya.
Anita, thanks very much indeed. We will start with the cricket, where the World Test Championship final between Australia and South Africa is well underway at Lord's in London. South Africa won the toss earlier and chose to bowl in overcast conditions, and it was a very good decision. They picked off early wickets. Kagiso Rabada and Marco Jansen have 2 apiece, but Steve Smith stabilised the innings before going for 66. Bo Webster then picked up the baton. He's on 55 with Australia, currently 190 for 5 at tea. Manchester City completed the signing of AC Milan midfielder Tijani Reinders in time for the Club World Cup. They paid an initial fee of £46.5 million for the Dutch international, who signed a 5-year deal. He's Pep Guardiola's 3rd major summer signing after the arrivals of Ryan Aït-Nouri and Ryan Cherki. The scheduling of women's matches is a systematic issue across top-level tennis, according to the head of the women's tour, Portia Archer. Her comments follow criticism of the French Open organisers, who featured no women's matches in any of the 11 primetime night sessions on their main court this year.
I think it's a missed opportunity. I think that fans expect, and I think increasingly we'll see that they demand, that they have the opportunity to see the best tennis matches, whether they're men or women, in primetime slots. I think it's sort of broader than that. I think it's more foundational and more systemic. So I don't really think about, an individual making the choice. It's probably not that simple.
The 3rd golf major of the year starts on Thursday with the US Open at Oakmont Country Club in Pittsburgh. The course is renowned as one of the toughest there is, and the players know they're in for a tricky few days.
I kind of equate some of the major tests to, like the majors in tennis, you're playing on a different surface. Like you got grass, clay, and then a hard court, and it's a different style of game. And the U.S. Open compared to the Masters is a completely different type of test. I think in the Masters you have a lot more shot making when you get around the greens, because it's a lot of fairway, there's pine straw, there's not really the rough factor. And then when you get here, it's a lot of hacking out of the rough. Both of them are fantastic tests. This is probably the hardest golf course that we'll play maybe ever.
Well, staying in Pittsburgh, where new Steelers quarterback Aaron Rodgers marked his first day with the team. The NFL's 4-time most valuable player spent months contemplating his future before deciding to sign a 1-year deal with the Steelers. The 2011 Super Bowl winner will also be looking to add another ring to his collection, having also revealed on his first day that he secretly got married a couple of months ago. Game 3 of the NBA Finals between the Oklahoma City Thunder and Indiana Pacers takes place later. The Finals moves to Indianapolis after a win apiece in the opening 2 games in Oklahoma City. And the Thunder are looking to continue the momentum shift, having comprehensively won Game 2 on Sunday.
We just have to keep finding ways to get better as a group. If we continue to do that, we'll be just fine. But if we've struggled in an area, that's an area we can get better at, and we have to attack that opportunity. And I think Game 3 is a perfect example of that.
There's a lot of things we have to do better. We realize that. I think we've lost, at least by the scoreboard, 6 out of 8 or 7 out of 8 quarters. And so we're playing a great team, and so we've got to make adjustments. And we got to play better.
And the cricket is just back underway at Lord's. You can follow that on the BBC Sport website and app. But that is all your sport for now, Anita.
Tanya, thank you very much. To the US now, and an overnight curfew, which has been in force in Los Angeles since 8 p.m. local time on Tuesday, has ended. Police had issued dispersal orders and say they made mass arrests after 5 successive days of protest. Despite opposition from California's governor and other officials in LA, President Trump deployed the National Guard and has also sent Marines to the city, although they currently remain at a staging area, not on the streets. The White House says the extra force is needed to protect border control agents as they carry out immigration raids. There have also been protests and clashes in New York. Well, CBS News correspondent Jared Hill, who's in New York, told us more about the situation across the country.
Lucy, we've seen these demonstrations happening in New York, in Chicago, as well as parts of Texas, Washington, D.C., California, obviously multiple of those. Here in New York yesterday, there were hundreds of people, if not somewhere close to 1,000, who were protesting really in one particular part of the city. I think that that's one of the things that's important to keep in mind here with all of these protests that we're seeing, is that largely they are pretty isolated to specific parts of these cities. There were a couple of dozen arrests yesterday here in New York, mostly related to things like disorderly conduct. There is another protest scheduled for today here in New York as well. One of the big questions, obviously, is going to be how long does this last? How much do we continue to see these protests around this specific issue? There have obviously been constant protests ever since President Trump took office, and this is the latest powder keg.
Jared Hill. And in the last few minutes, we've been hearing from the UN Human Rights Chief, who today says he has serious concerns about the way deportations are being carried out in the United States. Speaking to journalists in Geneva, Volker Turk said deportations must ensure the dignity of each and every person. He said it requires respect for international human rights law and international refugee law. Mr. Turk also said that the right to peaceful assembly needs to be guaranteed, and that dispersal of protesters by police should respect international human rights norms. And more now on the breaking news from the last couple of hours that President Trump has said a US deal with China is done, with Beijing to supply magnets and rare earth minerals, while the US will allow Chinese students in its colleges and universities. It follows trade talks between the two countries in London. On his Truth Social platform, President Trump said, "We are getting a total of 55% tariffs. China is getting 10%. Relationship is excellent." Our business correspondent, Michelle Fleury, has more on these developments.
So I think there'd been a lot of sort of question marks about what was going to come out of these talks. Then you started to hear that they were going well, that there was a framework in place. Donald Trump seeming to confirm all of that, basically just posting on his social media channel that there is a deal with China done. He says it is still subject to approval by himself and also Xi Jinping of China. He says that we will get full magnets and any necessary rare earths will be supplied up front by China. And he says in return, China will also be able to send its students to United States colleges and universities. There is also some talk about tariffs, the tariff rate that may be in place. But again, we're still waiting for the final actual details. And I think that's important to remember, that this is really just confirming that there is a framework in place, that there has been progress made. But the fine print is really what everyone wants to see. One of the key sticking points, Lucy, had been this idea about export controls over rare earths from China. These are crucial metals that are essential to so much of modern day manufacturing and also defense. For example, there had been reports that car companies were having difficulties getting the magnets they need for electric vehicles. There was a case where Ford had to temporarily shut down manufacturing because they were kind of short on supplies. So it does appear that there has been progress made on that front.
Michelle Fleury in New York. More now on the Chancellor's spending review here in the UK, where the government has outlined the choices it has made about where to allocate cash over the next 3 years. Rachel Reeves says she has made tough decisions on how much government departments can spend on public services. BBC Verify's Ben Shue looks at the winners and losers.
Who are the departmental winners and losers from the government's spending review? Let's go through the winners first. This shows the average real growth rate in day-to-day spending for each department in the 3 years to 2028-29. That's the period in which money has been allocated in this spending review. Health and social care, as expected, is a relative winner, with spending going up by 2.8% per year. Education rises by 0.7% per year. Defence, again as expected, also gets 0.7% per year, part of that pledge to get spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2027, although most of its spending uplift is from investment in defence kit, which isn't part of these figures. Justice, which covers courts and prisons, is up 1.8%, which will be a relief for a department which was not previously protected. But because health and defence are both big spending departments, if they get a rise, others inevitably get less, given the limited size of the pot. So let's look at some of those who have lost out. First, environment gets a 2.7% a year cut, and transport gets a 5% a year cut. MHCLG, the Housing, Communities and Local Government Department, that's Angela Rayner's department, gets a 1.4% a year cut. Now, to be clear, this is showing budgets for the day-to-day running costs of these departments. Some who list here will be doing better when it comes to their allocated capital infrastructure budgets. For instance, Angela Rayner will have more to spend on social housing, yet, as expected, some tough choices have been made on day-to-day spending. Choices which tell us something important about this government's priorities.
Ben Shu there from BBC Verify. A minute's silence has been observed earlier today in Austria following the school gun attack in Graz. A lone gunman shot dead 10 people before killing himself. Earlier, police said he left a farewell letter and what they described as a non-functioning pipe bomb at his home before carrying out the attack. The incident is the deadliest gun attack in the country's recent history, and Austria has declared 3 days of national mourning. Bethany Bell reports.
A minute of mourning across Austria. Church bells rang out for the victims of the school shooting in Graz, the worst gun attack in this country's recent history. It happened yesterday at this school during morning classes. Gunshots broke out. A 21-year-old Austrian man, armed with 2 weapons, moved through the school, shooting as he went. The suspect, who's believed to have acted alone, killed himself in a school bathroom. Outside the school today, people gathered to remember the dead and the injured. There's grief and tears.
It's a surreal situation, and all of us are not quite sure how to deal with it.
Marie-Christine's 16-year-old daughter goes to the school. She survived the attack.
So far, she is very composed, but I think she is still in shock. I think it would be important that more children are led in violence prevention, communication that has not happened so far.
Ilse told us she heard the gunshots.
Ich wohne hier und habe das vom ersten Schuss weg mitgehört.
I live here and heard the first shot and experienced it unfold, listening as the children cried.
The Red Cross has put up this screen to allow people a moment of private grief. There's a real sense of sadness and shock here. People are still struggling to understand how such an attack is possible in this country.
Volunteers from the emergency services remain in place near the school to help the grieving.
Es ist auf jeden Fall wichtig, ein gut geschultes Team haben, auf was man sich verlassen kann.
It's important to have a good team that you can rely on. All of my colleagues in this team are educated in finding the right things to say, even when there aren't the right words.
A debate has begun about whether Austria's gun laws need to be tightened. But for the mourners here, that has come too late.
Bethany Bell with that report. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
Disinformation.
There is no climate change.
You think you're winning.
The pandemic wasn't real.
Fooling people in the most sophisticated ways.
Social media places.
You fueled hate and confusion. And you make our job seem almost impossible.
Fake news.
Almost. You see, it's because of you we get up in the morning and work through the night, all over the world. The more you try to drown out reality, the harder we'll work to verify the facts. We will find your sleights of hand and expose them. So no matter how hard it gets, we'll never give up. We'll be watching. We'll be ready. It's the pursuit of truth that gives us our calling. The fight for truth is on.
Ministers are calling for calm after a second night of violent protests in Ballymena in County Antrim, following a protest over an alleged sexual assault. More than 30 police officers have been injured during the unrest, and a number of people have been arrested on suspicion of riotous behaviour. Petrol bombs and bricks were thrown at police during the disturbances, with officers firing plastic baton rounds in response.
Burning cars, chaotic streets and attacks on homes for a second night in a row. In this part of Ballymena, a crowd attacked police for several hours. 17 officers were injured. Some needed to be treated in hospital.
It is absolutely vital that the PSNI are given the time they need to investigate the incidents concerned, rather than face mindless attacks as they seek to bring peace and order to keep people safe.
Police deployed a water cannon and fired baton rounds to try to disperse the mob. They arrested 5 people. The situation calmed down around 1 o'clock in the morning, but some fires remained alight until daybreak.
Well, looking around you, you can see that rioters have basically attacked police with anything they could get their hands on: bricks, bottles, even street bollards. Council workers are now starting the clean-up, doing their best to get the streets looking normal again as soon as possible, but it's a big job.
There's an increasing sense of fear amongst residents from a migrant background. Some people have put signs in their windows to indicate their nationalities in the hope this will prevent their homes from being attacked. The trouble in Ballymena began on Monday night. Hundreds attended a peaceful march protesting against the alleged attempted rape of a teenage girl at the weekend. 2 14-year-old boys were charged with that offence. In court, they spoke in Romanian through an interpreter, and their solicitor said they deny the charges. Police said a group broke away from the demonstration, and some were intent on violence. The power-sharing devolved government has issued a statement. Ministers say those weaponising the situation in order to sow racial tensions don't care about seeing justice and have nothing to offer their communities but division and disorder. They go on, there can never be any justification for the violence that has taken place in recent days, during which residents have been terrorised and numerous police officers injured. The Police Service of Northern Ireland is asking other forces in the UK for backup in case the disturbances get worse. Chris Page, BBC News, Ballymena.
Yes, our Ireland correspondent Chris Page there. And we can join Chris live now in Ballymena for us. Chris, hello to you. What are the latest updates you have on the situation in the town?
Well, at the moment, Anita, it feels relatively calm, though there are certainly signs of last night's trouble pretty much everywhere, certainly in this area, just in the street across from here, Clavin Terrace. Well, you can see many houses have got the windows and doors boarded up. That's because they were smashed in over the last 2 nights. Several houses were set on fire too, and even today we have had more families with a migrant background leaving. Just a couple of hours ago there was a family packing their bags into the boot of their car in a neighbouring street. And of course police are asking for more support. They say they're deploying more resources, not just here but across Northern Ireland now, on the lookout should this trouble turn even more serious. There has been more political messages today also. It's a power-sharing devolved government here made up of 4 parties, and the head of that coalition, Michelle O'Neill, the First Minister of Sinn Féin, and Emma Little-Pengelly, the Deputy First Minister from the Democratic Unionist Party, they've given a joint news conference, and Ms O'Neill said that the violence was abhorrent, it had to stop, and Ms Little-Pengelly said that violence is always unacceptable. So politicians, community leaders and of course the police, the likes of the Northern Ireland Chief Constable John Boucher, who has said this violence is mindless, they are trying to put on a united front, as it were. They're trying to get a consistent message out there that this is achieving nothing. But the question is, will the people who've been behind this disorder listen to that? And certainly people here have not a small degree of concern that tonight could bring further trouble.
Chris, thank you very much. Chris Page, our Ireland correspondent there for us. Health officials in Gaza say at least 30 people have been killed in the latest shootings related to aid distribution. The director of the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City said at least 20 people had been killed trying to reach aid convoys carrying flour. The Israeli military hasn't commented yet. Our correspondent Hugo Bechega has more.
Even though we've seen that the Israeli authorities have eased this blockade on the distribution of aid, many in Gaza remain in desperate need of aid. And we've seen that since there has been this new mechanism for the distribution of aid, almost every day there have been deadly incidents around these hubs. So today we're talking about 3 separate incidents. There have been, shootings near an aid convoy carrying flour, and also near one of those distribution sites of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is this new mechanism backed by Israel and the US for the distribution of aid. We had a statement moments ago by the Israeli military. They said they were investigating those reports. But again, what the authorities in Gaza are saying is that since this new mechanism came into effect 2 weeks ago, more than 160 Palestinians have been killed trying to get aid. This is a new system that has been heavily criticized by the United Nations, by aid organizations, by virtually everyone who has some experience in aid distribution, because it requires people to go to these hubs in Gaza to be given a very limited amount of aid. So the UN has refused to cooperate with this system. It has described this new mechanism as insufficient. It says that the amount of aid that is being handed out in Gaza remains very, very low, and this is a system that has also been described as inhumane.
Hugo Bechega. The European Space Agency has released never-before-seen video and images of the Sun. The ESA's Solar Orbiter spacecraft has sent back the first pictures of the solar South Pole. The new images are important because they'll enable scientists to get a better picture of why the Sun's poles switch from north to south and back again every 11 years, and how this affects life on Earth. Here's our science correspondent, Palab Ghosh.
A view of the Sun that's never been seen before, its South Pole. The shimmering bright atmosphere is its hottest part at 1,000,000 degrees Celsius. The darker, lofted clouds are cooler wisps of gas, but still at a searing several thousand degrees. The pictures have been taken by the European Space Agency's Solar Orbiter spacecraft. They're the closest and most detailed ever taken, and they'll help scientists learn how the star that gives us life on Earth actually works.
So this is humanity's first ever glimpse of the poles of the Sun. And this is really important because the Sun's magnetic field has an 11-year cycle where it starts off at north-south and then flips to south-north. And to really understand this cycle, what we've been missing and what we're going to get now is images of the magnetic field at the poles of the Sun.
From Earth, the Sun seems like a bright, featureless disk. But at certain frequencies, space telescopes can reveal its detailed structure, how magnetic fields twist and turn on its surface to create solar flares and loops of gas. No one really knows how these magnetic fields work because scientists are unable to see how they move and shift on the north and south poles. But now they can.
You see these radial structures, that's what you'll see more at the poles.
It's these magnetic fields that determine when the Sun rages and spits out particles towards the Earth. This space weather can damage communication satellites and power grids and cause beautiful auroras.
The reversal of the polar magnetic fields on the Sun is, for me, I think, one of the big open questions in science. And what we'll be able to do with Solar Orbiter is measure for the first time really important fluid flows that grab pieces of the magnetic field of the Sun and transport them to the polar regions.
The new research will help scientists learn more about our closest star and predict its raging moods. Palab Ghosh, BBC News.
Now, coming up for you, more on the big political developments here in the UK with the Chancellor's spending review. If you're watching in the UK at 5:30, we'll be joined by a number of experts for a special Your Voice, Your BBC to answer any questions you have about that spending review. So get in touch by emailing bbcyourvoice@bbc.co.uk, or you can also WhatsApp on 07756 165 803. And a reminder, on the BBC website and app, you can see lots more detail about the spending review announcements, what they mean for various sectors, what they mean for you. So do stay with us here on BBC News for that and all of the rest of the day's main news.
Hello there. Warm and humid is the forecast for the next few days for all areas, but particularly so for England and Wales. But this combination of heat and humidity is likely to set off some heavy and thundery downpours, which will be pushing up from the south. Now, we've got high pressure over the near continent drawing this warm and humid air from France, and low pressure, it's weather fronts out in the Atlantic trying to make inroads and destabilising the atmosphere. So tonight most places will be dry, warm and muggy. We'll start to see some heavy showers and thunderstorms pushing up across the Channel Islands into southwest England and South Wales. Some of these could be heavy, risk of some localised flooding. Double figure values for all. So we start Thursday off on a warm and humid note. We'll have showers and thunderstorms from the word go across southwest England. These pushing into Wales, Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland as we head into the afternoon. And again, some of them could be heavy with a risk of some localised flooding. But elsewhere, it stays dry and sunny with some variable cloud. Top temperatures again around the mid-20s and feeling humid. Friday, probably the peak of the heat, especially the southeast of England. We'll see some sunshine here, scattered thundery downpours developing pretty widely, spreading their way northwards through the course of the day. Top temperatures, high 20s in the southeast. We could hit the 30 Celsius mark, low 20s further north and west. But as we head into the weekend, the Atlantic winds out, it turns cooler and fresher with temperatures returning closer to the seasonal norm. Showers in the north, sunnier in the south.
Little bit of onion. Thanks so much. It smells fantastic.
It's feeding time at the Liberty Sanctuary.
Sometimes I don't know where to find all this food. Sometimes in the evening I pray, what shall I give tomorrow?
Welcome to Hokkaido.
Thank you. This looks incredible. I had no idea they were so big. So this behind us is what this is going to become.
Yes, it's like the most exciting festival that happens in this region.
Here in the Maldives, sandbanks like this appear and disappear. They constantly change size and shape according to the seasons and the ocean's forces. And that really influences the way that the people live and adapt.
Inspiring travel. Watch now on iPlayer.
Thelma Schoonmaker. Noel Rogers. Salman Rushdie, welcome to This Cultural Life. Some of the world's leading artistic figures reveal to me their influences.
This is what we call fiction. You start from a real source and you reimagine it.
And the experiences that have inspired their own work.
Being an editor is one of the most creative jobs you could ever have in the world.
For a fascinating insight into what fires the creative imagination, join me, John Wilson, for This Cultural Life. Watch on iPlayer.
Ready for a lively debate? Sometimes our panelists agree, and sometimes they don't. There's people with a lot to say, and others who just say enough. Some who want to ask the hard questions, some who want to avoid them, and some who think they have the answers. They're guaranteed to keep you entertained, whether you agree or not. Politics Live, tomorrow at 12:15 on BBC Two and iPlayer.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves sets out her new plan for spending with a promise to invest in security, health and growing the economy.
In this spending review, total departmental budgets will grow by 2.3% a year in real terms. Compare that to the Conservative choice of austerity.
I'm Regina Vaidyanathan, live in Westminster. We'll be getting all of the political reaction to the Chancellor's plans, including speaking to the Shadow Chancellor in the next few minutes.
Leaders in Northern Ireland call for peace as 17 officers are injured in a second night of clashes in Ballymena, sparked by the alleged sexual assault of a teenage girl. Los Angeles emerges from a curfew as the US military prepares its response to immigration protests. We're standing by for an update from the National Guard. And in breaking news, the EU and UK agree a deal on the post-Brexit future of Gibraltar. We'll have more on that story for you. Hello, I'm Anita McVeigh and you are watching Verified Live. It's a hugely significant day here in the UK as the Chancellor has set out how taxpayers' money will be spent by the government until the end of the decade. We'll have lots of analysis, so let's cross straight to my colleague Regina Vaidyanathan, who's in Westminster for us. Regina.
Yeah, it's been a busy day here in Westminster. As you say, the UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves setting out her spending plans for the coming years. Now, it's important to say that this was not a budget, so there were no tax announcements or anything like that. This is all about allocating money that's already in the system. Now, there have been some winners and losers when it comes to different government departments as she set out those plans for the next decade. So let's get some of the headlines on this. The Chancellor confirmed total departmental spending will grow by 2.3% over inflation per year. Now, the NHS came out as a big winner today. The Chancellor saying that spending on the NHS will rise by 3% a year after inflation. She also confirmed £39 billion for social and affordable housing. Now, we heard a little bit about this in recent weeks, but the Chancellor also committed to a boost in defence spending. She also said she wanted to end asylum hotels in the next 4 years. Well, Rachel Reeves said she was rejecting austerity, which we saw under the Conservative government. Well, our political correspondent Layla Nathu sets out what we heard.
When will we feel better off, Chancellor?
Soon, fingers crossed, is what she's thinking. Rachel Reeves leaving Downing Street this morning for Parliament for a crucial moment in her time in charge of the country's finances. Earlier, Cabinet Ministers met to hear how much money their departments have been allocated for the coming years, both for spending and investment. Some have done better than others. Trade-offs unavoidable with limited room for manoeuvre in economic terms.
I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves.
In the Commons this lunchtime, the Chancellor set out her stall.
We are renewing Britain. But I know that too many people in too many parts of our country are yet to feel it. This government's task, my task as Chancellor, and the purpose of this spending review is to change that, to ensure that renewal is felt in people's everyday lives, in their jobs and on their high streets. The priorities of this spending review are the priorities of working people.
She's giving day-to-day spending across all departments an above-inflation boost and said she was taking a different approach to that of the Tories.
In contrast to our increase of 2.3%, they cut spending by 2.9% per year in 2010. So let's be clear. Austerity was a destructive choice for the fabric of our society.
There are cuts to some departments, including Transport and the Foreign Office, but schools and defence have been given an uplift, and the NHS was the big winner.
This Labour government is making a record cash investment in our National Health Service, increasing real terms day-to-day spending by 3% per year for every single year of this spending review. An extra £29 billion per year for the day-to-day running of our health service.
The Chancellor also set out areas for longer-term investment, around £14 billion to build the Sizewell C nuclear power station in Suffolk, more than £15 billion on bus, tram and train networks in the north of England and the Midlands. £86 billion for research in the science and technology sector by the end of the Parliament, and £39 billion towards affordable homes in England.
The Chancellor is betting that voters and those within her own party who've recently questioned her judgment will be convinced by big numbers on investing for the longer term in the hope of generating growth over time. There is more spending money in some priority areas, but these are a delicate set of decisions that Rachel Reeves knows will define what this Labour government can do.
Opposition parties gave their response to the Chancellor's announcement.
This is the spend now, tax later review. Because the Right Honourable Lady knows she will need to come back here in the autumn with yet more taxes. And a cruel summer of speculation awaits.
We are still not seeing the scale of ambition needed to turn the country around. We welcome the announcement of investment in the NHS, but on its own, it won't work unless the government invests in social care too.
Rachel Reeves and her Treasury team are telling us what the state will provide under Labour and how much that will cost. Big choices that they say marks a new phase of this government. Leila Nathu, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, we saw the Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride in that report from Leila Nathu, and he joins me now here on College Green. Welcome to our coverage, Mr. Stride. If I ask you this question first, if the Conservatives were to win the next general election, how much of this spending review would you continue with?
Well, it's a long way away, the next election. It's about 4.5 years away, so we'll clearly have a clear set of manifesto commitments at that point. But look, we would not have done what this government has done, which is to come into office, load up taxes on businesses, destroy growth.
This isn't about taxation today, though, is it, Mr. Stride? For example, let's break it down. Would you continue with that commitment for spending on the NHS?
So we would not have started where we are at the moment. It's like asking me if somebody had crashed a car into the wall at 100 miles an hour and handing me the steering wheel and saying, well, what do you do now? We would not have started from that point.
But
so
it's not, is it? I'm just asking you quite simply, would you continue with some of those promises
we're not
on
in
NHS
government.
and
We
defence?
haven't created this mess, so we're not in a position to write a budget, for example, for 4 years' time. But the point that I'm making is the reason why a lot of people are very concerned about what's going to happen in the autumn, when a lot of people are now expecting taxes to be raised, is because of the mismanagement of the economy. And that comes down to the tax decisions that were taken when Labour were elected, the taxing and spending splurge that they embarked upon that drove up inflation, kept interest rates higher for longer, and they're mounding up the debts now in a fiscally irresponsible way. And the debt servicing costs alone are running at £100 billion a year. That's twice what we spend on defence.
With respect, Mr. Stride, many would argue that previous Conservative governments, particularly what we saw under Liz Truss, caused a lot of the economic problems that the British economy's in now.
On the day of the last election, we had the fastest growing economy in the G7. We had near record levels of employment, near record low levels of unemployment. We had inflation down to bang on target at 2% on the day of the election. It's almost double that now under this government. So I'm afraid I don't think there is some kind of equality of what's happened when we were in office and what we've seen under this Labour government.
I mean, we just heard from the Chancellor saying that austerity was a destructive choice. I was looking at some IFS analysis of austerity under the Conservatives, talking about growth not being as strong as it could have been, and the Chancellor saying there was a lost decade of growth. So what would you say to that then?
Well, if you're referring to when we came in 2010, people forget that our inheritance from the then Labour government under Gordon Brown was one of the largest deficits in many years. It was running at over 10% of the size of the economy. And of course, in order to get that down, because by definition the deficit adds to the debt, we were adding to debt in the meantime. But by the time the pandemic came around, we had actually got into a current budget surplus. Okay, so that was the achievement we had made. We then had COVID, then had war in Ukraine, we had to get inflation down, we had to support jobs through furlough and so on. And of course that meant that we had to spend money in order to do that.
So we can argue, not you and I, but everyone can argue about, you know, when the economy was better or not. But we're talking about going forward now, Mr. Stride. And one thing some people have been asking is, what is Baidenomics? What is the Conservative economic policy under Kemi Badenoch? And I've asked you, would you continue with the growth in NHS funding and defence? And you're not willing to commit to that right now.
So when you say an economic policy, I think you have to look at the overarching objectives, and that has to be to get growth up and productivity up in our country. That is a complicated thing to work out how to radically rewire an economy to do that.
It is, but some people say that includes higher spending, some people say austerity. So just to get an idea of the ideology of where
I was about to do that.
Okay, please continue.
Let me explain. Okay, so first of all, we have to look at taxation. The tax burden is far too high. We need to get that down and simplify taxes. Secondly, we need to look at the size of the state. Before the pandemic, we had 365,000 civil servants. We now have 515,000. That speaks to the bloated nature of the state. We have to look at skills. We have to look at net migration. We have to look at the higher education offer. We have to look at controlling welfare spending. We have to look at supply side issues like building houses, roads, rail, reservoirs. And we have to look at getting our industrial electricity costs down, because we're paying 7 times what they do in China, 4 times what they do in the United States and Canada, and many other things beside. And that is why Kemi is absolutely right to be spending the time now to do that thoughtful, deep thinking, to come up with the answers to those challenges so we can have a much more radically and rapidly growing economy.
Okay, watch this space then. Thank you very much. Mel Stride, Shadow Chancellor there. Well, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, said she's made tough decisions on how much government departments can spend on public services. Well, BBC Verify's Ben Chu has been taking a closer look at who the winners are and who the losers are.
Who are the departmental winners and losers from the government's spending review? Let's go through the winners first. This shows the average real growth rate in day-to-day spending for each department in the 3 years to 2028-29. That's the period in which money has been allocated in this spending review. Health and social care, as expected, is a relative winner, with spending going up by 2.8% per year. Education rises by 0.7% per year. Defence, again, as expected, also gets 0.7% per year, part of that pledge to get spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2027, although most of its spending uplift is from investment in defence kit, which isn't part of these figures. Justice, which covers courts and prisons, is up 1.8%, which will be a relief for a department which was not previously protected. But because health and defence are both big spending departments, if they get a rise, others inevitably get less, given the limited size of the pot. So let's look at some of those who have lost out. First, environment gets a 2.7% a year cut, and transport gets a 5% a year cut. MHCLG, the Housing, Communities and Local Government Department, that's Angela Rayner's department, gets a 1.4% a year cut. Now, to be clear, this is showing budgets for the day-to-day running costs of these departments. Some who list here will be doing better when it comes to their allocated capital infrastructure budgets. For instance, Angela Rayner will have more to spend on social housing, yet, as expected, some tough choices have been made on day-to-day spending. Choices which tell us something important about this government's priorities.
Ben Chu there. We go from one Ben to another. I'm joined now to get more political reaction to the Chancellor's announcements by Ben Lake, who's the Plaid Cymru MP for Ceredigion Preseli. Did I say that right?
Perfectly. Thank you for
wonderful.
having me.
I always worry, especially with my surname. I should make sure I get names right. What's Plaid's reaction?
Well, disappointment, really. Much of the talk in Wales leading up to this spending review was about investment in rail infrastructure.
You got that, though?
Well, unfortunately, nothing near enough of what we were promised, and indeed what the Labour government had actually led us to believe that we would receive. So, for example, Welsh Government a few years ago made an assessment saying that Wales had been underfunded in rail to the tune of between 2.9 and 8 billion pounds. What we've had today is 445 million over 10 years. And without wanting to be a pedant, it's very easy to make promises in 10 years. There's an election before that.
The Chancellor saying, though, that the £1.6 billion spend on Wales is actually 20% more than people in other parts of the UK are getting. So actually she's arguing that Wales is doing quite well.
Well, I think one of the things she said was that it was a record-breaking settlement, and I would just politely say that is always the case. If inflation means that settlements should go up every year. The fact of the matter is this is a process through the Barnett formula. It's a mathematical inevitability that any increase in funding on reserved matters in England triggers a payment for Wales. At the end of the day, these are things that have been driven not by the specific needs of the people of Wales, but a mathematical formula.
But Ben, she's saying 22.4 billion each year for the Welsh Government. She's saying that that's a decent amount of money, relatively speaking.
When you consider some of the big problems we have in Wales, an older population, sadly a sicker population as well, the demands on many of our public services are relatively higher than other parts of the UK. So I think it's not really helpful to discuss about absolute numbers. We should be looking at what is actually needed, and does then the budget allocated towards that service actually meet the need.
OK, the bells of Big Ben end this interview. Thank you very much, Ben Lake from Plaid Cymru. Well, that's it for the moment. There's plenty more on the BBC News website, plenty of explainers and analysis, loads more coverage from the Spending Review. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
Now, the British government and the European Union have reached a deal over the future status of Gibraltar. News coming into us in just the last few minutes about this. The UK says the deal will avoid the need for checks on people and goods moving between Gibraltar and Spain. As a British overseas territory with a land border with the EU, Gibraltar's status has been left effectively unresolved since Brexit. Well, let's speak to our political correspondent, Damien Grammaticus, for more on this. Damien, hello to you. Yes, these talks have been ongoing since 2020, haven't they, since Britain left the EU. So what more detail do we know about the outcome?
Yes, exactly. So what happened back in Brexit time was that the UK left. Gibraltar, as a British territory, also left the EU. And the status was sort of left as was. So both UK and Spain claiming sovereignty. But the key issue really has been how the border should operate, how Gibraltar should interact with Spain, because it has a land border and thousands of people cross back and forth for work every day, goods and the like. And it's vital for both the security or the economy of Gibraltar and for that southern portion of Spain. So what has happened today is that after years of negotiations, which set out a broad sort of outline, the UK government and the EU have agreed a political agreement. So this isn't the final nuts and bolts, but it is the outline of it. And that is an agreement which will mean, and I can tell you in the words of the EU, all physical barriers be removed, checks and controls on persons and goods gone, circulating between Spain and Gibraltar. What that does basically means that on the land border between the two, they're going to remove the checks, but it does necessitate that so Gibraltar's airport and port will effectively be an EU external border then. So the UK side are making clear that Spanish officials will be stationed at Gibraltar's port and airport. Gibraltar officials will check people on arrival. The Spanish officials will also check them to check and see whether people have the rights to enter into and circulate within the EU's Schengen free movement zone. And that's the kind of compromise they have come up with. It's been welcomed by the UK government, who said that the Gibraltar status and its future were uncertain because this had been left over from Brexit. Welcomed too by the Gibraltar First Minister, Chief Minister, who's been involved in all these negotiations because of what it does for just securing Gibraltar's economic outlook.
So, Damien, as we mentioned, these talks continuing since 2020, now almost at a resolution. Do you see this very much as part of the new climate that we've been witnessing between the Labour government and the EU to try to, deal with some more practical elements of the ongoing relationship?
I think certainly, yes. And what we have seen exactly is just in the last few weeks, the UK-EU summit, where they agreed, the first summit since Brexit, the two sides sat down and agreed this what they called was a new partnership going forwards and more cooperation in various areas. And as they were negotiating that, the Spanish side, the Spanish foreign minister had said and pointed to the issue of Gibraltar, saying that that also needed to be resolved or dealt with in order for the UK to have full relations with the EU. Now, Spain had retained, since Brexit, a veto over the terms of any deal. So what we see here, a loose end from Brexit, alongside that new partnership, that's been being tied up. What underlying this, though, what we do have is both sides still maintaining their respective claims on sovereignty, and they're both saying this deal does nothing to change that. The basic situation remains that Spain claims sovereignty, but Gibraltar, the UK, will not relinquish that unless Gibraltar's people decide to themselves and say it is a decision for Gibraltar. So that fundamental position doesn't change, but it probably will bring criticism from some in the UK for allowing Spanish border authorities to operate within Gibraltar.
OK, Damien, thank you very much for that. Damien Grammaticus. More breaking news now from Poland, where the pro-EU government has won a vote of confidence in Parliament. It was called by the Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, after an opposition nationalist candidate was elected as president. Let me just give you the results of that. 243 votes supporting the government, 210 against, with no abstentions. Well, Donald Tusk called that vote immediately after the victory of Karol Nawrocki. While his role is largely ceremonial, he has the power to veto legislation, something that has hindered Mr. Tusk's ability to deliver on many campaign promises with the current president. So Mr. Tusk called that confidence vote because he said it was to demonstrate that the government still has majority support, even after in its view, suffering that blow in the presidential election when its candidate lost. We'll bring you more on the implications of that. Now, ministers are calling for calm after a second night of violent protests in Ballymena in County Antrim, following a protest over an alleged sexual assault. More than 30 police officers have been injured during the unrest, and a number of people have been arrested on suspicion of riotous behaviour. Petrol bombs and bricks were thrown at police during the disturbances, with officers firing plastic baton rounds in response. Our Ireland correspondent Chris Page sent us this report from Ballymena.
Burning cars, chaotic streets and attacks on homes for a second night in a row. In this part of Ballymena, a crowd attacked police for several hours. 17 officers were injured. Some needed to be treated in hospital.
It is absolutely vital that the PSNI are given the time they need to investigate the incidents concerned, rather than face mindless attacks as they seek to bring peace and order to keep people safe.
Police deployed a water cannon and fired baton rounds to try to disperse the mob. They arrested 5 people. The situation calmed down around 1 o'clock in the morning, but some fires remained alight until daybreak.
Well, looking around you, you can see that rioters have basically attacked police with anything they could get their hands on: bricks, bottles, even street bollards. Council workers are now starting the clean-up, doing their best to get the streets looking normal again as soon as possible, but it's a big job.
There's an increasing sense of fear amongst residents from a migrant background. Some people have put signs in their windows to indicate their nationalities in the hope this will prevent their homes from being attacked. The trouble in Ballymena began on Monday night. Hundreds attended a peaceful march protesting against the alleged attempted rape of a teenage girl at the weekend. 2 14-year-old boys were charged with that offence. In court, they spoke in Romanian through an interpreter, and their solicitor said they deny the charges. Police said a group broke away from the demonstration, and some were intent on violence. The power-sharing devolved government has issued a statement. Ministers say those weaponising the situation in order to sow racial tensions don't care about seeing justice and have nothing to offer their communities but division and disorder. They go on, there can never be any justification for the violence that has taken place in recent days, during which residents have been terrorised and numerous police officers injured. The Police Service of Northern Ireland is asking other forces in the UK for backup in case the disturbances get worse. Chris Page, BBC News, Ballymena.
And in the past few minutes, we have received this update on the situation in Ballymena from the Police Service of Northern Ireland.
Last night we saw a second night of sustained rioting and disorder in Ballymena. Sadly, once again, we saw absolutely disgraceful scenes of violence on our streets. A number of other protests, attacks on homes and disorder took place in Belfast, Lisburn, Coleraine, Carrickfergus and Newtonabbey. We witnessed businesses and homes being attacked and damaged, along with cars set on fire. As a result, people are waking up today feeling genuine fear for their lives and their livelihoods. Police officers again came under sustained attack over a number of hours from petrol bombs, heavy masonry, and had fireworks thrown at them. 32 officers have now been injured over the last 2 nights of rioting. And I want to say publicly my admiration for the bravery and professionalism of those officers that they showed when dealing with the challenges and the violence they had to face. Those officers come from our communities to work for our communities and to make a difference in our communities. They were doing that on Monday night, last night, and they will continue to do that for the days ahead. During the course of the disorder in Ballymena, after warnings were issued, authorised officers discharged 13 attenuating energy projectiles and a water cannon was deployed in an attempt to disperse the crowds. For the second day, the focus of this mob violence has been upon our diverse communities and the police. This has no place in any right-thinking and civilised society. Let me say in the clearest possible terms, this senseless violence is utterly unacceptable, and as I see it, serves only to endanger lives and destroy our local area, our local communities. And I want to appeal directly to those involved or considering becoming involved in the disorder to stop and think. Ask yourselves, is the hatred something you want to be associated with? Is this worth being prosecuted for? Is it worth your future being put under threat, or indeed the future of your children? Most importantly, please ask yourself, how are these criminal acts, how are they helping the ongoing criminal investigation in support of a young victim who deserves justice? This violence only serves to undermine the criminal investigation and cause further distress and turmoil to a young victim and her family. This violence threatens to derail the very pursuit of justice it claims to challenge. Our investigations into the criminals behind this disorder is ongoing, and we're resolute in our determination to bring those perpetrators to justice. As of this afternoon, 6 individuals have now been arrested for public order offences. 1 has been charged. All video and online footage is currently being reviewed, and I assure you that prosecutions will undoubtedly come. A significant policing operation will be in place in Ballymena and beyond over the coming days. We're taking steps to increase available resources and are surging a significant number of extra officers, vehicles and equipment to those areas where the rioting is taking place. This will have an impact on our communities. This will take away vital resources needed to police other areas. It will have an impact on our ability to serve communities. As part of my forward planning, therefore, I have now activated the request for mutual aid resources from policing colleagues in Great Britain to ensure we have the necessary support to maintain public order and bring offenders to justice in the days to come. I am appealing for calm over the coming days and again urge anyone considering becoming involved in violence and disorder to think long and hard, to think about the repercussions for themselves and their community. And to those who may wish to protest and have their voice heard this evening or indeed in the days ahead, please do so peacefully and lawfully. But be aware that, as we have seen in Ballymena, others may use your peaceful intention as a cover for their own violent agenda. To those who have been affected by the violence and are feeling fear and intimidation, I want you to know that we stand with you. The Police Service of Northern Ireland stands with you. We're here to help and support you in any way that we can. Finally, I appeal to everyone across our communities in Northern Ireland to continue to publicly and loudly condemn this criminal behaviour on our streets. Stand with us in saying that it is not okay and it must stop. These criminals should not be louder than us. We cannot allow hatred and mindless violence to win. Please join me in condemning these criminal acts and support those communities under attack and the men and women of the Police Service of Northern Ireland who come to work every day to make a positive difference in our communities. Thank you. You will have seen over the coming nights we have resourced and surged more and more police officers onto the streets. Tonight we have a significant operation in place. You will have seen last night that our full range of tactics, including the use of water cannon, AEP, we were making arrests on the streets, all to try and reduce the threat to communities and the threats to our officers. Clearly this takes its toll. A significant number of officers have been injured over the past days. I want to put on record my thanks for the well wishes that I have been getting from across our communities for the safety and good health of my colleagues. That is really appreciated. We will be supporting them and are supporting them as they recover from the injuries that they have, to make sure that they are back in the streets of Northern Ireland making a difference.
Sometimes it can be argued that it can spill over because police are there. So how are you balancing that, please?
Well, we have seen a number of calls over social media for protest activity this evening at various places within Northern Ireland. It can be difficult at times to make a really strong assessment as to how much that will be and where exactly that will be, but we saw some of that last night. Our job as the police is to facilitate peaceful protest. People have an absolute right to have a voice, and I know there are significant concerns that are being expressed from communities. And last night indeed we saw protests that were peaceful. They engaged with police and they made their point, but did so in a peaceful manner. Sadly, there were other protests that connected to them, and following them we saw significant violence. I want to make it very clear, when I have spoken loudly about the racist thuggery in our streets, that is not to say that I am labelling communities as racist, but when I watch families having their doors kicked in who happen to be from our diverse communities, I have to call that out for the racist behaviour that it is. We will balance, and this is something that we do here in the Police Service of Northern Ireland and have done for years, people's absolute right to protest peacefully and have their voice heard, whilst at the same time being equipped and ready to react to crime and criminality in our streets.
And we can't really hear the questions here, but just a reminder that this is Assistant Chief Constable Ryan Henderson of the Police Service of Northern Ireland answering questions and giving an update on the situation with regards to the violence and disturbances in Ballymena.
Around the motivation for the violence and is there coordination behind it. It is absolutely of note that both last night and the night before, the fact that petrol bombs and masonry were thrown at police would say that there were people who were intent on violence right from the off. So that says to me that there is pre-planning involved from those that want to attack us. You will see the power of social media connecting different parts of Northern Ireland in terms of the desire to protest, but also the desire to be violent and how that has been done. And we have seen that in a number of sites over the past couple of days. That is galvanising, I think, some of this support and some of the violent behaviour. And again, I would appeal to right-minded people not to allow themselves to be involved or dragged into it, because if you're a young person and you are in the criminal justice system, it has consequences for you, and I do not want our young people involved in that. And the question, no doubt, is whether there's paramilitary involvement in this. At this point, it's not clear to us through intelligence or what we're hearing that there's paramilitary coordination to it. But I want to be very clear that if that does come out from our investigations, I'll not be slow or shy in attributing blame to those who are involved.
What about far-right groups? And are you expecting the violence to spread?
As I said, last night we saw significant violence. We also saw peaceful protest. My nearly 30 years in policing makes me absolutely alert to the fact we could see more tonight, and that's why we're preparing and planned for that. But I don't want the communities of Northern Ireland to feel unsafe, nor do I want them to feel that I am saying that we will definitely see this tonight. I'm preparing for it. I'm prepared that it might happen, But at this stage, it's too early to judge just the extent of that.
Ryan, Julian O'Neill, BBC. Just to elaborate on Brendan's point, who is actually coming out onto the streets? Are they from outside the locality? Where are they coming from? We saw last summer when there was this kind of violence, people were coming from the Irish Republic, for example. Is there any evidence that people are coming far and wide to these protest violent incidents? And following on from that, in respect of mutual aid, can you give us an indication of how many officers you think you might need and when you might get them?
Last night, and I have been able over the course of the week to see firsthand just who was on the streets and who has been involved in violence, and anyone who has watched it on social media will see there are a lot of young people who are intent on violence on the police and actually violence on others in the community. We are seeing that is in the main people from that local area, and that in itself is telling in that the damage and the violence and destruction is happening in their local area. And again, I would appeal for any who have influence to be able to help take those young people away from that area. That's not to say that I don't think people are travelling to it as well. Of course, I do think that is a factor, given that, as I say, through social media, often these events are advertised and people will travel to it. But at this early stages, most of what we are seeing is driven by people locally.
And on the mutual aid question?
In terms of mutual aid, I have activated a request to mutual aid from colleagues in Great Britain. You will recall that last summer during the disorder we called in mutual aid. That was in the region of around 80 officers from in Police Scotland in the main and elsewhere. That is to allow some degree of rest and support to our own staff who will be very much be at the front line of this over the coming days. That I think is really adequate for us to help give us that support. They will be well supported by our own colleagues who will be with them. And again, I want to reassure you and the public that those officers that come will have been trained by Police Service of Northern Ireland officers to be able to work in the environment that they're coming to here in Northern Ireland.
And that is Assistant Chief Constable Ryan Henderson from the Police Service of Northern Ireland giving reporters an update on the situation in Ballymena, where over the last 2 nights there has been violence. He described the diverse communities of Ballymena and police as the focus of mob violence over the last couple of nights. The protest sparked by an alleged assault on a teenage girl. Let's go to our Ireland correspondent Chris Page, who's in Ballymena, keeping a watch on all the developments there for us. And Chris, we heard from the police officer there, I guess, hoping for the best, appealing to people to be calm, but also preparing potentially for more trouble.
Yes, Assistant Chief Constable Ryan Henderson there painted really quite a stark picture of what had happened over the last 2 days, Anita. And he made the point that while he wasn't predicting violence tonight, he said he didn't want any communities to feel unsafe. He knew from his experience in policing and the pattern of events here in Ballymena and in a few other parts of County Antrim last night, well, violence is certainly possible, and he was trying to assure as many people as possible that the police are equipped to deal with that if indeed there is more trouble. In the last few minutes, actually the Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland, Emma Little-Pengelly of the Democratic Unionist Party, has just arrived here in the part of the town where the violence has been at its most serious. She's currently just down the street talking to a group of local people. She is the joint head of the power sharing devolved government here, and earlier today she stood beside the First Minister, her main power sharing partner, Michelle O'Neill of the Irish Nationalist Party, Sinn Féin, really I suppose presenting a united front. Ms O'Neill said that the violence was abhorrent and racism pure and simple, and Ms Little-Pengelly said that violence was always unacceptable. So certainly the message has gone out from politicians, from the police, as you've been hearing there in that news conference, also from other community leaders. And we have, throughout the course of today and yesterday, been speaking to families, many of them from a migrant background, who live in this area, who've been telling us how worried they've been about the violence. We've seen more families having to leave their homes today, packing up their bags into the boots of their cars, feeling very much, of course, that they have been under attack, deliberately targeted over the last couple of days. Again, behind me you will see some houses that have had their doors and windows boarded up because they've had them smashed in. Also, some houses have been set on fire. So there's no doubting the seriousness of the situation. More than 30 police officers injured over these last 2 nights, 5 people arrested so far, and certainly there is still a sense and a worry amongst people here that the worst of this might not be over.
Chris, very briefly, if you would, we heard from the Assistant Chief Constable. He said that he had seen calls on social media for more protests. Just tell us a little bit more briefly about the mood there and concerns.
Yes, the Assistant Chief Constable referred to a number of protests that have been put on social media, as it were, for tonight, and he said the police will always support peaceful protesters, but he warned that there could be people who would aim to use the cover, if you like, of peaceful protests for their violent intent. So again, it's a warning, and essentially, I think the senior police officers and indeed people not least here in these areas most affected, hoping for the best but preparing for the worst also.
OK, Chris, thank you very much. Our Ireland correspondent Chris Page in Ballymena. We'll be back after this short break. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
Be ready. Change can happen in an instant. Check on the BBC Weather app.
A minute's silence has been observed earlier today in Austria following the school gun attack in Graz. A lone gunman shot dead 10 people before killing himself. Earlier, police said he left a farewell letter and what they described as a non-functioning pipe bomb at his home before carrying out the attack. The incident is the deadliest gun attack in the country's recent history, and Austria has declared 3 days of national mourning. Bethany Bell reports.
A minute of mourning across Austria. Church bells rang out for the victims of the school shooting in Graz, the worst gun attack in this country's recent history. It happened yesterday at this school during morning classes. Gunshots broke out. A 21-year-old Austrian man, armed with 2 weapons, moved through the school, shooting as he went. The suspect, who's believed to have acted alone, killed himself in a school bathroom. Outside the school today, people gathered to remember the dead and the injured. There's grief and tears.
It's a surreal situation, and all of us are not quite sure how to deal with it.
Soweit sehr gefasst, aber ich glaube.
Marie-Christine's 16-year-old daughter goes to the school. She survived the attack.
So far, she is very composed, but I think she is still in shock. I think it will be important that more children are led in violence prevention, communication that has not happened so far.
Ilse told us she heard the gunshots.
Ich wohne hier und habe das vom ersten Schuss weg mitgehört.
I live here and heard the first shot and experienced it unfold, listening as the children cried.
The Red Cross has put up this screen to allow people a moment of private grief. There's a real sense of sadness and shock here. People are still struggling to understand how such an attack is possible in this country.
Volunteers from the emergency services remain in place near the school to help the grieving.
Es ist auf jeden Fall wichtig, ein gut geschultes Team haben, auf was man sich verlassen kann.
It's important to have a good team that you can rely on. All of my colleagues in this team are educated in finding the right things to say, even when there aren't the right words.
A debate has begun about whether Austria's gun laws need to be tightened. But for the mourners here, that has come too late.
Bethany Bell with that report. The United Nations says that there are nearly 138 million children working worldwide. UNICEF and the International Labour Organization released a joint report which said that despite progress, a deadline to end child labour by 2025 had been missed. They said that nearly 40% of the children aged from 5 to 17 were risking their health working in mines, factories or fields. At the current rate, they said, it would take hundreds of years to be rid of child labour. President Donald Trump says the US deal with China is done, with Beijing to supply magnets and rare earth minerals, while the US will allow Chinese students in its colleges and universities. On Truth Social, he said, "We are getting a total of 55% tariffs. China is getting 10%. Relationship is excellent." Our business correspondent Michelle Fleury has more from New York.
So I think there'd been a lot of sort of question marks about what was going to come out of these talks. Then you started to hear that they were going well, that there was a framework in place. Donald Trump seeming to confirm all of that, basically just posting on his social media channel that there is a deal with China done. He says it is still subject to approval by himself and also Xi Jinping of China. He says that we will get full magnets and any necessary rare earths will be supplied up front by China. And he says in return, China will also be able to send its students to United States colleges and universities. There is also some talk about tariffs, the tariff rate that may be in place. But again, we're still waiting for the final actual details. And I think that's important to remember, that this is really just confirming that there is a framework in place, that there has been progress made. But the fine print is really what everyone wants to see. One of the key sticking points, Lucy, had been this idea about export controls over rare earths from China. These are crucial metals that are essential to so much of modern day manufacturing and also defence. For example, there had been reports that car companies were having difficulties getting the magnets they need for electric vehicles. There was a case where Ford had to temporarily shut down manufacturing because they were kind of short on supplies. So it does appear that there has been progress made on that front.
Michelle Fleury. South Korea has suspended loudspeaker broadcasts into North Korea, which have been playing along the border since last July. The new president, Lee Jae-myung, wants to improve bilateral ties and had promised to stop them. But organisations advocating for human rights for North Koreans have criticised his move. The North is for now continuing its own border transmissions, which are part of a campaign that also saw Pyongyang fly hundreds of balloons carrying sacks of rubbish and excrement south. Now, after their bitter social media fallout, the Tesla boss Elon Musk has apologised for posts he made about Donald Trump. Writing on his platform X, Elon Musk says, "I regret some of my posts about President Donald Trump last week. They went too far." The backdrop here is the bitter war of words that culminated in the tech billionaire suggesting without evidence that President Trump appears in unreleased files related to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. It started with Musk criticising President Trump's spending bill over concerns it would increase the US deficit. Mr. Trump addressed the criticism in the Oval Office during a visit by German Chancellor Friedrich Merz.
But I'm very disappointed because Elon knew the inner workings of this bill better than almost anybody sitting here, better than you people. He knew everything about it. He had no problem with it. All of a sudden he had a problem, and he only developed the problem when he found out that we're going to have to cut the EV mandate, because that's billions and billions of dollars. But I'm very disappointed in Elon. I've helped Elon a lot.
Well, Elon Musk's criticism of the president soon became more personal, with him taking aim at the election result. He wrote on X, "Without me, Trump would have lost the election. Dems would control the House and the Republicans would be 51-49 in the Senate." Even as the feud escalated, Elon Musk's father, Errol Musk, said he thought it was possible to mend their relationship.
I think they're rethinking everything now and things will come back to order, you know. Right?
What have you advised your son to do in terms of his relationship with President Trump?
Restore the relationship.
Excuse me. Do you think,
yes.
Is that possible to?
Yes, why not?
Now, some breaking news on the protests that have been happening in LA. The US military has been speaking, saying that Marines near the city will be receiving training on how to handle civil disturbances. More on that coming up. Now, let me just pick up on that story relating to LA, because the overnight curfew, which has been in force in Los Angeles since 8 p.m. local time on Tuesday, has ended. Police had issued dispersal orders and say they made mass arrests after 5 successive days of protests. President Trump deployed the National Guard as well as Marines, despite opposition from California's governor and officials in Los Angeles, although the Marines are in a staging area, not on the streets of the city yet. The White House says the extra force was needed to protect border control agents as they carried out immigration raids. CBS News correspondent Jared Hill, who's in New York, told us more about the situation right across the country.
Lucy, we've seen these demonstrations happening in New York, in Chicago, as well as parts of Texas, Washington, D.C., California, obviously multiple of those. Here in New York yesterday, there were hundreds of people, if not somewhere close to 1,000, who were protesting really in one particular part of the city. I think that that's one of the things that's important to keep in mind here with all of these protests that we're seeing, is that largely they are pretty isolated to specific parts of these cities. There were a couple of dozen arrests yesterday here in New York, mostly related to things like disorderly conduct. There is another protest scheduled for today here in New York as well. One of the big questions, obviously, is going to be how long does this last? How much do we continue to see these protests around this specific issue? There have obviously been constant protests ever since President Trump took office, and this is the latest powder keg.
And let's just tell you a little bit more about that news we've heard in the last few minutes from Major General Scott Sherman, who is leading the deployment of nearly 5,000 troops to California. He's been speaking about the activation and deployment of Marines to Los Angeles. He says the National Guard are only there to help law enforcement carry out their duties.
We have 1,000 that have done operations so far. That is both the protection of the installations or the federal buildings, and then also protection of federal law enforcement as they conduct their mission. On Title 10, on federal orders, these soldiers do not conduct law enforcement operations, that like arrests or search and seizure. They are strictly used for the protection of the federal personnel as they conduct their operations and to protect them, to allow them to do their federal mission.
The European Space Agency has released never-before-seen images of the Sun. The ESA's Solar Orbiter spacecraft has sent back the first pictures of the solar South Pole. The new images are important because they'll enable scientists to get a better picture of why the Sun's poles switch from north to south and back again every 11 years, and how this affects life on Earth. Here's Palab Ghosh.
A view of the Sun that's never been seen before. Its South Pole. The shimmering bright atmosphere is its hottest part at 1,000,000 degrees Celsius. The darker, lofted clouds are cooler wisps of gas, but still at a searing several thousand degrees. The pictures have been taken by the European Space Agency's Solar Orbiter spacecraft. They're the closest and most detailed ever taken, and they'll help scientists learn how the star that gives us life on Earth actually works.
So this is humanity's first ever glimpse of the poles of the sun. And this is really important because the sun's magnetic field has an 11-year cycle where it starts off at north-south and then flips to south-north. And to really understand this cycle, what we've been missing and what we're going to get now is images of the magnetic field at the poles of the sun.
From Earth, the sun seems like a bright, featureless disk. But at certain frequencies, space telescopes can reveal its detailed structure, how magnetic fields twist and turn on its surface to create solar flares and loops of gas. No one really knows how these magnetic fields work because scientists are unable to see how they move and shift on the north and south poles. But now they can.
You see these radial structures, that's what you'll see more at the poles.
It's these magnetic fields that determine when the sun rages and spits out particles towards the Earth. This space weather can damage communication satellites and power grids and cause beautiful auroras.
The reversal of the polar magnetic fields on the sun is, for me, I think, one of the big open questions in science. And what we'll be able to do with Solar Orbiter is measure for the first time really important fluid flows that grab pieces of the magnetic field of the sun and transport them to the polar regions.
The new research will help scientists learn more about our closest star and predict its raging moods. Palab Ghosh, BBC News.
Amazing images. Do stay with us here on BBC News. Much more to come.
Hello there. Warm and humid is the forecast for the next few days for all areas, but particularly so for England and Wales. But this combination of heat and humidity is likely to set off some heavy and thundery downpours, which will be pushing up from the south. Now, we've got high pressure over the near continent drawing this warm and humid air from France, and low pressure and weather fronts out in the Atlantic trying to make inroads and destabilising the atmosphere. So tonight most places will be dry, warm and muggy. We'll start to see some heavy showers and thunderstorms pushing up across the Channel Islands into southwest England and South Wales. Some of these could be heavy, risk of some localised flooding. Double figure values for all. So we start Thursday off on a warm and humid note. We'll have showers and thunderstorms from the word go across southwest England. These pushing into Wales, Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland as we head into the afternoon. And again, some of them could be heavy with a risk of some localised flooding. But elsewhere, it stays dry and sunny with some variable cloud. Top temperatures again around the mid-20s and feeling humid. Friday, probably the peak of the heat, especially the southeast of England. We'll see some sunshine here, scattered thundery downpours developing pretty widely, spreading their way northwards through the course of the day. Top temperatures, high 20s in the southeast. We could hit the 30 Celsius mark, low 20s further north and west. But as we head into the weekend, the Atlantic winds out, it turns cooler and fresher with temperatures returning closer to the seasonal norm. Showers in the north, sunnier in the south.
Drone strikes in Ukraine and Russia, prisoner exchanges and occasional rounds of negotiation, but still no sign of a ceasefire. Donald Trump said he could end this conflict, but he hasn't yet. For more on the war in Ukraine, join me, Paul Adams, here on BBC News.
Factories across China are rushing to make and ship their goods to the United States after a ceasefire was agreed between Beijing and Washington in their economic war. But how long will it last? Join me, Laura Vicker, as we gauge reaction across China for BBC News.
National Public Radio, NPR, is one of the most recognised names in US media, but President Trump accuses it of having a liberal bias. We've been speaking to the boss of NPR, who's planning a fight back against moves to cut its federal funding. That's all coming up on The Media Show on BBC News.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves speaks to the BBC after setting out her new plan for spending, with a promise to invest in security, health and growing the economy.
And I'm Regina Vaidyanathan, live in Westminster with all of the political reaction. We'll be taking a look at who the winners and losers are in today's spending review.
2 nights of violence, 32 officers injured and 6 people arrested. Police in Northern Ireland call for peace in Ballymena.
For the second day, the focus of this mob violence has been upon our diverse communities and the police. This has no place in any right-thinking and civilised society.
US Marines take civil disturbance training ahead of their deployment on the streets of Los Angeles, where there's been unrest over President Trump's immigration crackdown. And the EU and UK agree a deal on the post-Brexit status of Gibraltar. Hello, I'm Anita McVeigh and you are watching Verified Live. It's a hugely significant day here in the UK because the Chancellor has been setting out how taxpayers' money will be spent by the government until the end of the decade. We're going to have lots of analysis for you, so let's cross straight to my colleague, Regina Vaidyanathan, who's in Westminster for us. Regina.
Thank you very much, Anita. Well, this, as you say, is a hugely significant day, not just politically, and we'll get into that in a moment, but also for people up and down the UK, because the Chancellor has set out which government departments are going to get a spending boost and which departments might not get as much as they had hoped for. To be clear, this wasn't a fiscal event, as they say, so there were no announcements on taxes. This was all about distributing the money that's already there. Now, the Chancellor confirmed that total departmental spending will grow by 2.3% over inflation per year. Well, she says the spending on the NHS will rise by 3% a year after inflation, and confirmed £39 billion for social and affordable housing. Rachel Reeves also committed to a boost in defence spending, something we'd heard about in recent weeks. She also talked about wanting to end funding for asylum hotels in the next 4 years. Well, as we were saying, there were winners and losers. Some departments didn't do as well as they might have hoped, including the Home Office, for example, and the Foreign Office. Well, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, said she is rejecting austerity. With more, here's our political correspondent, Leila Nathu.
When will we feel better off, Chancellor?
Soon, fingers crossed, is what she's thinking. Rachel Reeves leaving Downing Street this morning for Parliament for a crucial moment in her time in charge of the country's finances. Earlier, Cabinet Ministers met to hear how much money their departments have been allocated for the coming years, both for spending and investment. Some have done better than others. Trade-offs unavoidable with limited room for manoeuvre in economic terms.
I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves.
In the Commons this lunchtime, the Chancellor set out her stall.
We are renewing Britain. But I know that too many people in too many parts of our country are yet to feel it. This government's task, my chance, a task as Chancellor, and the purpose of this spending review is to change that, to ensure that renewal is felt in people's everyday lives, in their jobs and on their high streets. The priorities of this spending review are the priorities of working people.
She's giving day-to-day spending across all departments an above-inflation boost, and said she was taking a different approach to that of the Tories.
In contrast to our increase of 2.3%, they cut spending by 2.9% per year in 2010. So let's be clear. Austerity was a destructive choice for the fabric of our society.
There are cuts to some departments, including Transport and the Foreign Office, but schools and defence have been given an uplift, and the NHS was the big winner.
This Labour government is making a record cash investment in our National Health Service, increasing real terms day-to-day spending by 3% per year for every single year of this spending review. An extra £29 billion per year for the day-to-day running of our health service.
The Chancellor also set out areas for longer-term investment. around £14 billion to build the Sizewell C nuclear power station in Suffolk, more than £15 billion on bus, tram and train networks in the north of England and the Midlands, £86 billion for research in the science and technology sector by the end of the Parliament, and £39 billion towards affordable homes in England.
The Chancellor is betting that voters and those within her own party who've recently questioned her judgment will be convinced by big numbers on investing for the longer term in the hope of generating growth over time. There is more spending money in some priority areas, but these are a delicate set of decisions that Rachel Reeves knows will define what this Labour government can do.
Opposition parties gave their response to the Chancellor's announcement.
This is the spend now, tax later review. Because the Right Honourable Lady knows she will need to come back here in the autumn with yet more taxes. And a cruel summer of speculation awaits.
We are still not seeing the scale of ambition needed to turn the country around. We welcome the announcement of investment in the NHS, but on its own, it won't work unless the government invests in social care too.
Rachel Reeves and her Treasury team are telling us what the state will provide under Labour and how much that will cost. Big choices that they say marks a new phase of this government. Leila Nathu, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, in the last few minutes, we have been hearing from the Chancellor. She's been speaking to our political editor, Chris Mason. Let's have a listen.
Chancellor, thanks for your time today. People are impatient for things to improve. You campaigned promising change. A lot of this, though, is slow burn, long term, isn't it?
People are impatient for change, and I'm impatient for change as well after 14 years of Conservative government. It is why, for example, we are introducing free school meals for all children whose parents are on universal credit, which will come in the next school year. It's why we're rolling out breakfast clubs, and it's why we are substantially increasing the amount of money to insulate people's homes, to take money off people's energy bills.
Still long term. You'll make an argument that long term spending is savvy, but people have to inevitably wait for that.
Well, I'm not going to apologise for making the long-term decisions in our country's interest, but whether it's investment in things like new nuclear power stations or carbon capture and storage, or new transport investment in Manchester or Leeds or the North East, it may take time for those trams and those trains to arrive, but we'll have spades in the ground in this Parliament, creating good jobs for local people in communities all across the UK.
The Home Office budget is being cut at a time when the small boat crossings are out of control, and the police are saying this afternoon that they are being left short again. Is that really sensible, that squeeze in the Home Office?
Well, the police budget is going up by, the spending power for the police is going up by 2.3% a year.
They worry it's still going to amount to being really tough for them.
I recognise that not everyone has been able to get exactly what they want in this spending review, but we've allocated £190 billion more for day-to-day spending during this forecast period, more money for capital investment. We're not able to do everything that everyone would want, but real terms, spending power increases for the police of 2.3% a year, above inflation, enabling us to deliver on the commitments we made in our manifesto.
And on small boats and the Home Office budget being squeezed?
Well, the Home Office budget is coming down as we spend less on asylum accommodation. And it is really important that we get people out of those asylum hotels and that we deport people who have no right to be in this country. And that is why we see that spending on asylum hotels come down, and that money will be reinvested in our frontline public services rather than putting up asylum seekers in hotels.
I'm joined now by our political correspondent, Alex Forsyth. Always good to have you on the BBC News channel, Alex. So we saw that interview there with Rachel Reeves. One thing she said to Chris was not everyone can get what they want. And we know that in the days running up to this, there were, excuse me, I'm about to sneeze. No, I'm not.
You in advance.
There were different government departments tussling over getting the biggest share of the pie. And we know the Home Office, for example, as Chris questioned the Chancellor on there, didn't get as much as it wanted, for example.
Yeah, overall, the Home Office budget is going down. Now, the argument that Rachel Reeves was making when she spoke to Chris was that actually spending for police is going to go up. But that does take into account an assumption that council tax, so the bit of the council tax that you pay for your police force, will go up as well. But broadly speaking, the Home Office budget is going to go down, and we have had some reaction from police already suggesting that they will look at the implication of that, but it may have an impact on what they can do as police forces. So while overall spending is going up, and it was the point that Chris was making there, a lot of this is investment in long-term projects, those capital projects, so the big nuclear power stations, the affordable housing, the roads and the trams and the trains. It's those day-to-day spending decisions where we might see a squeeze, and the question is, what impact will that have on public services that a lot of people rely on?
Indeed, and I was speaking to the Shadow Chancellor in the last hour, who believes that there'll be taxes coming down the road.
Yeah, the Conservatives have claimed this for a while, and you know, you'll be familiar that it's not entirely unheard of for a political party to claim the other political party might put your taxes up. That's quite a familiar line that we hear. But the Conservatives aren't the only ones who've indicated that at some point that might be the case. The Institute for Fiscal Studies, in the run-up to this spending statement, also made the argument that things can look tight. The Chancellor hasn't got a huge amount of wriggle room, and depending on what happens with the broader economy, then it may be the case that there might have to be some tax rises to come. Now, the government's been really clear. It said it in its manifesto, and it's repeated it since, that the three main taxes, as people call them, so it's income tax, national insurance and VAT, won't go up. And the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, repeated that just last week. Beyond that, of course, they're saying this isn't about setting out tax plans today. This is about spending, not tax. That comes at the budget. So we'll have to see.
How much of a gamble do you think this is for her? Because she's increasing spending in key areas. Her critics say that she'll have to borrow more in the long term. What's your analysis?
I think there are two really interesting points out of this. I think one thing that we heard coming out of today is from the Prime Minister in the conversation that he had with his cabinet around the table this morning before the Chancellor's spending review, and then echoed again in what the Chancellor was saying. I think they're trying to suggest that after their first year in office, where they wouldn't say it, but it is known that some of the decisions they've taken haven't been popular with people, I think they're now trying to say, look, this is us moving on, and we're making decisions that for the long term are going to come good. And the other interesting thing about this is that decision about this focus on investment and spending for the future. You know, they think that if they do this, they'll get the economy growing. They think if the economy grows, they'll have more money for public services. But the question that sits behind that is, are people going to be patient enough to wait?
Okay, Alex Forsyth, thank you very much, our political correspondent there. You can, of course, hear Alex on any questions. Now, let's break down a little bit more about what we were talking about with Alex there, and that is that the Home Office hasn't really come out very well in terms of getting a big boost in funding. Let's discuss that with our Home Editor, Mark Easton. Mark, it's good to talk to you. We saw in that interview there with Chris Mason and the Chancellor, one of the things that she talked about, which is reducing the spending on asylum hotels. How practical is that?
Well, they are now promising. We now have an actual commitment, a pledge to end the use of asylum hotels by the end of this Parliament in 2029. For some people, that's not nearly quick enough. They say these hotels are totally unsuitable and hugely expensive. But nevertheless, there are others who worry that we won't be able to get there even in that time. I think it's practical if two things happen, and this is certainly the kind of formula that's being applied both in the Home Office and the Treasury. One, we have to reduce the pressure on the system. We have to stop more of those boats from reaching the UK, fewer asylum seekers coming into the system, and the Home Office is hopeful that there are measures in place which will do that, not least a change in the rules for the French police to be able to stop life rafts crossing the channel up to 300 metres from shore. They think that might be a game changer. The other aspect of this is the supply. That basically, really over the last 10-15 years, we have not produced enough extra dispersal accommodation, as it's called, specifically for asylum seekers, and that's why we've had to move them into hotels. So one of the things that the Chancellor has announced today is that there will be extra money for the Housing Ministry to actually build some dispersal accommodation to house more asylum seekers, not in hotels.
And what about the other things when it comes to the Home Office, for example, funding the police?
Yes, well, the police have been very active, I'm sure you will remember, over the last few weeks in saying that without having a substantial increase in their budgets, they were going to struggle to be able to keep the government's promises on extra officers, particularly neighbourhood patrols, or indeed the government's pledge to halve knife crime and halve violence against women and girls. There was an expectation that perhaps it could be as low as a 2% increase in police budgets. In the end, they got 2.3%. That's perhaps still not a number that the police forces themselves will be very happy with. They are talking about actually having to introduce some serious sort of limits on what they can actually do. Prioritization, they're talking about up and down the country. Some crimes will not be able to be investigated. They won't be able to recruit as many people as they want, and that's despite this real terms 2.3% increase in police funding.
OK, Mark Easton, our Home Editor, thank you very much for taking us through the changes when it comes to funding for the Home Office. Well, let's turn to what's arguably the department which is the biggest winner in today's spending review, and that is the Health Service. Well, joining me now is Hugh Alderwick, Director of Policy at the Health Foundation. It's an independent think tank. Welcome to BBC News, Hugh. Pleased with what you heard today?
Well, given the pressures on public finances, this is a good settlement for the NHS. About 3% growth every year should be enough to keep up with growing demand for services from an ageing, growing population, make some improvements, but it's still going to be tight. 3% by historic standards is not high, it's lower than the average, and the government's assuming that the NHS can make productivity improvements, do more with the spending it's got. But capital spending, investment in buildings, equipment, IT, the stuff staff, doctors, nurses, receptionists need to do their jobs properly, looks like it's going to be broadly flat for the rest of the Parliament. So boosting productivity will be hard. So yes, a generous settlement, particularly compared to other areas of spending, but still going to be tight.
How can this settlement in today's spending review help bring down waiting lists, which is something that the government's really trying to work on?
This should go some way to doing that. As I say, this is a generous settlement, should allow the health service to do more to get through that backlog. But whether it can do it depends on other factors, not just the amount of money going in. How many staff are recruited, whether they stay, whether they've got the skills and equipment needed to tackle the waiting list, and also what happens with the health of the population. So it's still going to be really tight. It also depends on what happens in other public services. It's not particularly clear from the documents what will happen with social care spending, but it looks like that's going to be a tight settlement too.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because the two go hand in hand, but the settlement doesn't look like, as you say, it's going to be as generous for social care.
That's right. So the social care system in this country is a threadbare safety net. It desperately needs money and reform. It looks like what's been promised, as I say, not particularly clear from the documents, is going to be enough to keep up with growing demand, not reform the system, not radically improve it. The government said it's committed to paying care workers more, that's good, but again, it's not clear where the money's going to come from and if it's there. So I think social care is going to continue to struggle, and really improving the health over the long run is not just about the NHS. So a generous settlement for the health service, but if other public services are struggling around it, particularly adult social care, then we're going to still see challenges getting through that waiting list and keeping people healthy.
Okay, thank you very much, Hugh. Well, I think Hugh touched on what really has been the theme of the day here in Westminster, which is that there have been some winners and there have been some losers, and that is the nature of how these things work. When you're trying to allocate a pot of money, you cannot please everyone. Well, there is more on the BBC News website. We've got plenty of analysis from our specialist correspondents who specialise, like Mark Easton, for example, in the different government departments. So they're breaking down how the spending review will impact areas like defence, for example, as well, which has done quite well today. We've also got more on the interview that Chris Mason did with the Chancellor on that live page as well. Plenty more comments from opposition parties as well. So you can go to our live page to get plenty more. That's it from us in Westminster for the moment. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
6 people have been arrested and 1 charged following violent protests in Ballymena in County Antrim. The unrest began on Monday after 2 boys speaking through a Romanian interpreter appeared in court to face a sexual assault charge, which they deny. In the past hour, we've heard from the Police Service of Northern Ireland. Assistant Chief Constable Ryan Henderson appealed for the violence to end.
For the second day, the focus of this mob violence has been upon our diverse communities and the police. This has no place in any right-thinking and civilised society. Let me say in the clearest possible terms, this senseless violence is utterly unacceptable, and as I see it, serves only to endanger lives and destroy our local area, our local communities. And I want to appeal directly to those involved or considering becoming involved in the disorder to stop and think. Ask yourselves, is the hatred something you want to be associated with? Is this worth being prosecuted for? Is it worth your future being put under threat, or indeed the future of your children? Most importantly, please ask yourself, how are these criminal acts, how are they helping the ongoing criminal investigation in support of a young victim who deserves justice?
The British government and the European Union have reached a deal over the future status of Gibraltar. The UK says the deal will avoid the need for checks on people and goods moving between Gibraltar and Spain. As a British overseas territory with a land border with the EU, Gibraltar's status has been left effectively unresolved since Brexit until now. An overnight curfew, which has been in force in Los Angeles since 8 p.m. local time on Tuesday, has ended. Police had issued dispersal orders and say they made mass arrests after 5 successive days of protests. President Trump deployed the National Guard and Marines, despite opposition from California's governor and officials in LA. The White House says the extra force was needed to protect border control agents as they carry out immigration raids. We've also heard from Major General Scott Sherman, who says 700 Marines are preparing to be deployed, but won't be on the ground in Los Angeles on Wednesday. With regards to the National Guard, he said that the troops are there strictly to protect federal buildings and personnel and to assist law enforcement to carry out their duties.
They're allowed to temporarily detain and wait for law enforcement to come and arrest them. They do not do any arrest. They are strictly there to detain, to wait for law enforcement to come and handle those demonstrators.
Major General Scott Sherman. The European Space Agency has released never-before-seen video and images of the Sun. The ESA's Solar Orbiter spacecraft has sent back the first pictures of the solar South Pole. The new images are important because they will allow scientists to get a better picture of why the Sun's poles switch from north to south and back again every 11 years, and how this affects life on Earth. Here's our science correspondent, Palab Ghosh.
A view of the Sun that's never been seen before, its South Pole. The shimmering bright atmosphere is its hottest part at 1,000,000 degrees Celsius. The darker, lofted clouds are cooler wisps of gas, but still at a searing several thousand degrees. The pictures have been taken by the European Space Agency's Solar Orbiter spacecraft. They're the closest and most detailed ever taken, and they'll help scientists learn how the star that gives us life on Earth actually works.
So this is humanity's first ever glimpse of the poles of the Sun. And this is really important because the Sun's magnetic field has an 11-year cycle where it starts off at north-south and then flips to south-north. And to really understand this cycle, what we've been missing and what we're going to get now is images of the magnetic field at the poles of the Sun.
From Earth, the Sun seems like a bright, featureless disk. But at certain frequencies, space telescopes can reveal its detailed structure, how magnetic fields twist and turn on its surface to create solar flares and loops of gas. No one really knows how these magnetic fields work because scientists are unable to see how they move and shift on the North and South poles. But now they can.
If you see these radial structures, that's what you'll see more at the poles.
It's these magnetic fields that determine when the sun rages and spits out particles towards the Earth. This space weather can damage communication satellites and power grids and cause beautiful auroras.
The reversal of the polar magnetic fields on the sun is, for me, I think, one of the big open questions in science. And what we'll be able to do with Solar Orbiter is measure for the first time really important fluid flows that grab pieces of the magnetic field of the sun and transport them to the polar regions.
The new research will help scientists learn more about our closest star and predict its raging moods. Palab Ghosh, BBC News.
Amazing images. Do stay with us here on BBC News because we have lots more coming up when we'll be answering your questions about the UK Chancellor's spending review today.
Hello there. Warm and humid is the forecast for the next few days for all areas, but particularly so for England and Wales. But this combination of heat and humidity is likely to set off some heavy and thundery downpours, which will be pushing up from the south. Now, we've got high pressure over the near continent, drawing this warm and humid air from France, and low pressure and weather fronts out in the Atlantic, trying to make inroads and destabilising the atmosphere. So tonight, most places will be dry, warm and muggy. We'll start to see some heavy showers and thunderstorms pushing up across the Channel Islands into southwest England and South Wales. Some of these could be heavy, risk of some localised flooding. Double figure values for all. So we start Thursday off on a warm and humid note. We'll have showers and thunderstorms from the word go across southwest England. These pushing into Wales, Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland as we head into the afternoon. And again, some of them could be heavy with a risk of some localised flooding. But elsewhere, it stays dry and sunny with some variable cloud. Top temperatures again around the mid-20s and feeling humid. Friday, probably the peak of the heat, especially the southeast of England. We'll see some sunshine here, scattered thundery downpours developing pretty widely, spreading their way northwards through the course of the day. Top temperatures, high 20s in the southeast. We could hit the 30 Celsius mark, low 20s further north and west. But as we head into the weekend, the Atlantic winds out, it turns cooler and fresher with temperatures returning closer to the seasonal norm. Showers in the north, sunnier in the south.
Disinformation.
There is no climate.
You think you're winning.
The pandemic wasn't real.
Fooling people in the most sophisticated ways.
The Met Police. Social media posts.
You fueled hate and confusion. And you make our job seem almost impossible.
Fake news.
Almost. You see, it's because of you we get up in the morning and work through the night. All over the world. The more you try to drown out reality, the harder we'll work to verify the facts. We will find your sleights of hand and expose them. So no matter how hard it gets, we'll never give up. We'll be watching. We'll be ready. It's the pursuit of truth that gives us our calling. The fight for truth is on.
Today we're looking at the state of British politics.
Asking, is technology ruining football?
Are we too obsessed with our phones?
Helen from Hull wants to know, how hot's the planet going to get?
And we'll explain why prices keep going up and up.
Also, Rach, did you know space has its own smell?
Really? What of? The world is fast-moving and can be confusing.
So let's talk about it.
5 Live Breakfast with Rachel and Rick. Listen on BBC Sounds.
This is frontier country.
Broaden your horizons.
If this is what being a 21st century nomad is all about, sign me up.
Caribbean's relationship with the seas are changing. And deepen your understanding.
What must it have been like for them, not knowing whether they were going to make it? How important is this region?
If something starts changing here, we see the change all over the world.
This is just incredible.
The Travel Show. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
Be ready. Change can happen in an instant.
Check on the BBC Weather app.
It's time for Your Voice, Your BBC. And joining me in the studio today to answer your questions about the Chancellor's spending review are BBC Verify's policy and analysis correspondent Ben Shue, our cost of living correspondent Kevin Peachy, and the Associate Director at the Institute for Fiscal Studies, Ben Zaranko. Ben and Kevin, welcome to all of you. We have a lot of questions to get through, so let's crack on. And we'll begin with you, Ben Shue. Where is the money to pay for all this spending coming from, asks an anonymous questioner.
Right, well, it's a great one to kick us off, isn't it? So I think the short answer is it's coming from a combination of extra borrowing by the government and extra taxes by the government. So to broaden out on that, effectively the envelope for what we've seen distributed today was set in the budget last year by Rachel Reeves. And in that budget, she essentially said she was going to borrow an extra 2%, so she was going to spend an extra 2% of GDP on a combination of day-to-day spending and capital spending, and she was going to raise an extra 1% roughly a year of GDP in taxation. Remember the national insurance rise, that was the bulk of it. And she was also going to borrow an extra 1% of GDP. So you put that all together and that explains how they are going to pay for this spending that they've allocated to different departments today.
OK, well, that is a very good question, I guess, to kick off this discussion. Let's get into some specifics then. And the NHS, one of the winners, I guess, out of today's spending review. Ben Zaranko, we have this question from Julia in Preston, asking what's been done about NHS wastage. Whilst I applaud money for the NHS, I believe that there is huge wastage there too.
It's a great question. The NHS is a big budget. It's hundreds and hundreds of billions of pounds. It's about 40% of all the money that the government spends on public services. And within that, of course, there will be inefficiencies and waste. And today there was promises of additional cash for the NHS, but that cash is coming with strings attached. The government is asking the NHS to make what they call productivity improvements of about 2% per year. So that's with the same amount of cash and staff and resources, deliver 2% more care, basically. And they're also seeking some quite large savings, actually, from the NHS, what you might think of as the back office budget, almost the bureaucracy, of about 10 to 15% by the end of the Parliament. And those are really quite chunky savings. I suppose one risk is if you cut back on those managers and those people who are doing the stuff behind the scenes, eventually that might start to have a knock-on impact on the frontline staff. Maybe their rota doesn't get done on time. Maybe some of the organisation doesn't work quite as well. So there's a risk there, but the government is seeking efficiency savings and to cut down on waste in a big way.
And just before I come to you, Kevin, I'm going to skip ahead to another question on my list because it's very much related to this theme. And a lot of people will want to know if there's lots more money going into the NHS. Is that going to mean that there will be more appointments available with GPs or appointments available with dentists? What's the answer to that question? Do we know?
Well, that's certainly the hope. There's a lot more cash going in. There's going to be lots more detail in the 10-year plan for the NHS. The government will be publishing probably in the next few weeks with a bit more detail on what sorts of care they want to focus on, what the priorities will be. But they've said explicitly today they want to provide more hospital appointments. They've already provided 2 million more since they're coming into power. They want to build on that to try and get NHS waiting lists down. They've promised hundreds of thousands more dentist appointments and they've promised to hire more GPs. So if this money is spent well, you would hope that would feed through to it being easier to see a doctor, being easier to get into the hospital and so on.
Yeah, that would be one thing that I think would make the public say that they can really see the impacts of spending on the NHS. But let's see how that trickles down or in what way it might trickle down. Now, cost of living is often related, Kevin, isn't it, to being able to get on the housing ladder or the cost of rent and so forth. This question comes from Mick, who says 39 billion on affordable housing. Brilliant. But what exactly does that mean, he asks. My daughter-in-law is on 60k and got turned down for a mortgage as she is single. If someone on 60k can't buy anything, just who can?
Yeah, I think we have loads of questions, don't we, on NHS appointments, but housing's right up there as well. And so there's big announcements today, 39 billion, as you say, on social housing. There's interestingly in there's a guarantee for social landlords on how much they can charge in rent. That's really important because that 1% above inflation for the next 10 years what that means is they can then say, right, we're going to put this amount of money aside for house building. And as we know, the government's got these very, tough housing targets on building 1.5 million homes by 2030. They're going to meet that. I noticed that Ben, surrounded by Bens, but that Ben has got his spending review booklet in there, and something specifically for Mick in there. There's one line which is about
there it is. There it is. I'm holding it up so we can see this. This document, lots of detail in there.
I've done my homework.
Yeah, we spend our day going through that stuff, so you don't have to. But in there, one line about the mortgage guarantee scheme. Now, that's coming to an end of June, and what that means is that there will be there are mortgages that can go up to 95% loan to value. So people with just a 5% deposit can get on the housing ladder. The kind of thing that Mick's talking about there. That's coming to an end at the end of June, but the government has said that is going to continue permanently beyond that. No great detail in there, but another sort of confirmation, if you like, that that guarantee is going to be in there and hopefully help first-time buyers.
And on a theme as well, Kevin, Patricia from Eastbourne asks, when the 1.5 million new homes are completed, will you prohibit investors rushing in to grab and buy up these new, in inverted commas, affordable homes so they can be added to their rental portfolio?
Yeah, loads of questions about the house building targets, whether they're achievable, what's going to happen at the end of it, is it going to affect house prices and so on. There's obviously a lot of money going into this, but as Ben was saying earlier about the spending envelope, I guess it's a great example, isn't it, of how there's this money going into the spending envelope, but what's really crucial is whether that envelope is going to be delivered and the cost of the stamp on it almost, and whether that's really going to happen. And so, yeah, big questions over house building, whether it's going to happen and where those houses are and what's going to happen to them.
Do you want to come in on that, Ben?
I think just a bit of context on that £39 billion figure, because it obviously sounds like a lot for affordable housing. That's actually spread over 10 years, we understand. So probably about £4 billion a year, which is roughly double what the grant was going into affordable and social housing before. So it is a big increase, but not perhaps quite as big as it sounds. And it's worth putting it in context again. People in the housing industry were saying you probably needed to put maybe 10, 11 billion pounds a year of grant to try and hit the targets which the government has set for building more social housing. So undoubtedly a step up, but perhaps not meeting what is required.
Ben Chu, saying with you, we have a question about defence, and of course defence has been very much in the headlines, hasn't it, especially since Donald Trump came back to the White House. He's been putting pressure on other members of NATO to increase their spending on defence. So this question comes from Liam in Dublin, who asks, how much will be spent on defence?
Yeah, well, it's a very straight question, and the straight answer is that by 28-29 it will be about £73.5 billion. That's including the day-to-day spending of paying for squaddies and the soldiers, and also the kit that they are going to get. Considerable uplift. Of course, the government's made a commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence by 2027. That's why it is going up to those kind of figures. But a bit of context again, of course, the government has an ambition for 3%. This is only flatlining at 2.5%.
And some criticism directed at the government that they haven't pinpointed exactly when that 3% target will be reached.
That's right. And also, as we know, NATO is saying 3.5% should be the target for member states. Donald Trump wants 5%. So this is a big increase in defence spending. But again, is it going to be enough to meet the ambitions and the requirements on the UK? That's another question.
Ben Zaranko, a question for you. Why is Scotland getting more than Wales and Northern Ireland, asks someone anonymously.
Well, it's a very good question. And I think it's worth saying that most of the announcements today in the spending review, not all, but most were focused on England. It was a spending review set by the Westminster government with regard to the things that they have control over. Lots of services in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are devolved, and the responsibility of the devolved parliaments. And the way that funding is allocated is by something called the Barnett formula. It's basically by a formula, by an equation, which is based on the population shares of different parts of the country and on the sorts of services their local governments are responsible for providing. And because Scotland has a bigger population than Wales or Northern Ireland, the formula, when you spend more in England, as the government is doing, will give more to Scotland than it will to Wales or Northern Ireland. So it's not so much a specific decision Rachel Reeves has made, it's because of this long-standing formula which dates back to I believe the 1970s, And that sort of governs how much goes to Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland to spend however they like. They don't have to spend it in the same way that the Westminster government is.
And that was, I think, a very clear explanation of what can be quite a complex subject, trying to understand the formulas for spending, Kevin.
Just to give you a specific example as well, when we look at the problems that the government's had over winter fuel payments, well, this week they announced this U-turn, and the policies are slightly different depending on where you are in the UK. So England and Wales, they have this U-turn, and they'll say, more than 3/4 of pensioners will now receive the payment. But in the meantime, there were changes in Scotland, and they came up with a different policy, and now that's probably going to be reconsidered again. The same in Northern Ireland. So you can see, although the funding is put in different pots, if you like, and goes to the different countries, then the policies can then become quite confused, especially if they chop and change.
OK, I'm ticking off the questions as I ask them. Still quite a few to go. This one for you, Benchu, on the Bank of England base rate. Ian from Bristol asks, in an ideal world, what would be the optimum Bank of England base rate, i.e. the best compromise between savers and borrowers? It's difficult to, keep everyone happy all of the time, isn't it?
It's a very good question. It's a very difficult question to answer because the Bank of England sets short-term interest rates at a level which it thinks the economy can handle without inflation getting out of control. And it's not ex ante clear before you actually know what's going to happen, what that level should be. I mean, for context, it's about 4.25% at the moment. As Rachel Reeves pointed out, it's come down quite a lot over the last year or so, 4 cuts. Some economists think it could come down to 3.25% by the end of the year. But that's really speculation because it will depend on what the Bank of England committee, which sets interest rates, think will be the sustainable rate to stop inflation going above its 2% target.
And I guess it depends as well, doesn't it, on to what extent the spending review delivers the kind of economic growth that the Chancellor hopes it will.
Yes, in the longer term, that's absolutely right. That will determine the rate of interest rates. I think, to be clear, though, there's nothing new in this particular statement on the demand side in the economy because it was all set last year. So we'll see what longer-term impact on growth these measures have. And that will obviously, as you say, have an impact ultimately on interest rates as well.
And it's worth remembering, of course, that most people are savers and borrowers. So, they're affected in different ways. Not a case of a trade-off between savers and then a different group of people who are borrowers. There are lots of people with mortgages and savings who have, had to balance that all out as interest rates have changed.
Very good point, Kevin. And the next question to you, another anonymous one, bringing us back to housing. Since house building has a huge carbon footprint, how do you build 1.5 million homes a year and reach net zero targets? Did we learn much about that today?
No, not a great deal. It's a tricky one for the government. There's a whole host of issues about that target, not least, are there enough brickies out there, that kind of thing. So I think that's going to be chewed over as that target continues to be challenged. And we'll see whether they can do it in a carbon neutral way.
There was a question from Chris Sturman in Lincoln who says it's all very well building new houses, but who is going to build them, saying that there's a serious shortage of bricklayers, plumbers and electricians.
Yeah, absolutely. As Kevin said, there are big concerns in the industry about the numbers available, and obviously the government wants to bring down net migration when a lot of these construction workers in the past have come from overseas. So there's a bit of a tension there in terms of the government's ambitions when it comes to housing delivery and migration. Just a point on the net zero point, I think the government would actually try and flip that on its head, because the reality is, if we are going to meet our net zero targets, we have to radically change the way our homes are powered from gas boilers. They would say putting in heat pumps in new homes is a crucial way of driving that decarbonisation overall for the UK. So I think they would regard it more of an opportunity rather than a danger, but we'll see.
OK, Ben Zaranko, the next one for you. This is about policing, the next question, and it comes from Steve, who asks, what does the Chancellor's spending review mean for policing? Frontline policing can't keep up with increasing demands. Do we now face reducing budgets or reducing spending in policing for the next 3 years?
The short answer is police funding won't be going down over the next 3 years in England and Wales, which is what today's announcement's covered, going back to our previous question. Police spending power, which is a function of both the funding they get from central government, but also the local taxes and precepts that are paid to pay for local policing services, mean that funding will grow by a little over 2% per year, above inflation over this Parliament, a little less than 2% over the next couple of years. So that's not cuts. The question then becomes, is it enough to deliver the improvements the government wants to see and to deliver...
Which is where we get to the slightly longer answer, I suspect. Just give us a sense of what that is, where that goes.
As the questioner asked or mentioned, the police are under great pressures. Crime is getting more complicated, crime rates have ticked up. There's lots of concern, particularly about types of theft, but also types of online crimes and fraud. Meeting all of those demands at once within this envelope will prove tricky. They will have to face tricky trade-offs, and if the government wants to recruit more police officers, if you also want to pay them more, can you manage both of those things within the same budget? We'll have to wait and see. And so I think that it won't be everything the police were hoping for, but perhaps it could have been worse.
OK. Kevin, one for you. This is on travel, specifically train travel. This is from Lakshmi, who says, the rail card is expensive. In many countries, the rail fare is cheaper and affordable. Why is there no cap on rail fares? And I think with some of the questions, obviously, we're trying to interpret in a way what we've heard from the Chancellor today in the spending review to see what that might mean for a particular area of interest. And obviously lots of people are very, very interested in the cost of getting around by train.
Yeah, and a big chunk of the speech today actually was about transport and about rail links and about bus fare caps and so on. Quite a lot in there. So
more, I think, though, on how that can be a driver for growth and for jobs rather than necessarily what it's going to mean for fares.
Absolutely, all about investment. And a lot of the speech today, a lot of what's in that book is about something that's happening over the long term. And I think the frustration for many commuters is the cost. So, yep, the rail card went up by £5 in March for many people, and regulated rail fares. There are some which are regulated, like season tickets, for example. They went up by more than 4% in England and Wales, nearly 4% in Scotland. And I think the frustration for many people who use the rail services is, yes, the cost is going up, but the service is, bedeviled by delays and cancellations, and they feel as though they're getting frankly a bit of a rubbish service for what they're paying. And so I think the Chancellor was concentrating on that long-term investment into some of these services, looking at Liverpool to Manchester rail link, looking at projects to upgrade the rail services in Wales and so on. So I think that's where the concentration was, and we had that bus fare cap as well. There's obviously millions of people who use the bus to get to work.
Mm-hmm. If anyone hasn't caught up on that, remind us what that one said. So what the Chancellor said about that.
So the cap, which went up from on most single bus fares in England, the cap went up from £2 to £3 in October. After much speculation, it will now stay at £3 until at least March 2027. So a little bit of certainty for people who use the bus, which is a real lifeline in many areas for people to get to work.
OK, so a bit more detail on bus fares, not so much on train fares. Ben Zarenko, this question asks, an anonymous one, asks, will lifting the council tax cap make it unaffordable? We're going to pivot back to a couple of housing-related questions now. So will lifting the council tax cap make it unaffordable?
Well, it's worth thinking of what might happen to council tax first. And buried in the document, you can be forgiven for missing it, is an assumption that councils will raise council tax by 5% per year. The government's publishing this number saying local government spending will go up by 3% a year. That's predicated on them raising council tax by the maximum possible amount. Now, for some families, that may well be very tricky on their budget. That may well force difficult choices on other things might have to be sacrificed. No one likes to see higher tax. Councils don't like raising council tax, but they're doing it in the face of considerable pressures on their budgets, particularly from things like adult social care and children's social care, where if the government's not providing much money from the centre, raising local taxes is how they make the sums add up.
OK, and then we have this one from Lynn Astle in Sheffield, Kevin. who says we have plenty of new homes being built in Sheffield, but no social housing. Is it down to local government to ensure that at least part of new building schemes relate to social housing, or does the housing minister need to put pressure on them to ensure that they don't get building permission unless a percentage is for social housing? So we've already discussed in an earlier question the topic of affordable housing. Did we hear anything today that answers that question for Lynn?
And it's all part of that. So it's part of the same announcement. So they add more money into social housing, into affordable housing, and certainly on a political sense, there was pressure, we understand, from the Deputy Prime Minister on trying to get that in. And so lots of questions, I think, about the funding for social housing, but also where it's put. Lynn there in Sheffield probably wants to see it in Sheffield, and I suspect if you go around every other city in the country, they will say, well, we'd like it here too. So it's one thing saying there's going to be house building targets, but if those houses are beyond affordable for many people, then that's a whole different issue.
And another anonymous question related to housing, which asks, why are we continuing to throw money at new builds when so many properties are lying empty and run down? Instead of pumping money into building houses with no infrastructure around them, why don't we make grants available for people to renovate empty houses? Ben Chu, if you could maybe take that question.
Well, this is a line which a lot of people have used over the years, saying we don't need more housing, we can just use the vacant stock. And I think it's the analysis I've seen is based, it's a bit of a misconception about the ability of that stock to actually provide the housing that people really need. You need a bit of vacant stock because not everyone is going to be occupying a house at the same time. They may be in the process of selling it, for instance. So you do need a bit of slack. If every house was occupied, that wouldn't be a sign of a well-functioning housing market. I think most of the analysis which has been done is that you really do need to increase the supply quite drastically. Whether the government's target is appropriate or not, there's a lot of analysts out there who'd say you need to go even further than the 1.5 million new homes actually to make a real dent in the affordability problems that people have when it comes to housing.
And Ben Zaranko, do you want to come in on that one?
Well, just to say that as well as the number of houses, we should also think about how they're used and the incentives created by the tax system, for example, where stamp duty really discourages people from moving homes, because when you move, you have to pay this whacking big tax bill. So let's say your children have moved out, you've got a couple of spare bedrooms, you could downsize, but the tax system basically says, don't do it. And maybe we could think about incentives like that to encourage the houses we do have to be maybe used more efficiently.
And specifically in the spending review, there is some money for improving insulation in existing homes as well. Those kinds of things, which the idea being obviously it improves homes and it makes them cheaper to run, brings down energy use, hopefully brings down some of those bills for people too, which clearly is looming over this whole thing. The cost of living still a struggle for many, many people.
It's actually really interesting, isn't it, to see quite how many of these questions, obviously it's not necessarily a scientific survey, but interesting to see how many of these questions coming in for this question and answer session are on the subject of housing in one form or another. Kevin, I know you've been writing in I think people can look at the BBC website and app to see your latest article there about how people who work in the public sector might be affected by today's announcements, and also about the issue of more free school meals. Talk us through those.
Yes, so two different things. We've got the pressure on jobs and wages. I mean, there will be people watching with great interest on which departments were winners and which department were losers. Excellent video about that from Ben.
I'm coming on to that in a minute.
But in that, there's obviously among the winners probably some more job security, some more job creation. Among the losers, where budgets are squeezed, then maybe those wages will be squeezed as well. That sort of opportunity for new jobs could be less as well. So, for example, science and tech seeing quite a lot of investment going in. You might think that there is some job creation in that area. Somewhere like rural affairs, which has had its budget squeezed a bit more, maybe less so. So that's sort of almost an indirect impact on some of this. But clearly, it's for people in the public sector. But then there are lots of connected businesses in the private sector who will be affected too.
And school meals, briefly, just a very quick word on those.
Yeah, as previously announced over the last few days, in the big build-up to this increase in free school meals for for children of parents on universal credit in England from next September.
OK, Ben and Ben, about 45 seconds each for this last two questions. Winners and losers, Ben Chu?
OK, so we looked at this earlier. Big winners, I suppose, are health and social care. Education gets 0.7%. Defence, of course, we've talked about that. This is day-to-day spending, but the big losers that we've identified, departments like environment, day-to-day spending going to decline by an average of minus 2.7%. As a result of this spending review. Transport minus 5%, that's a particularly large one. And Angela Rayner's department, day-to-day spending, housing communities down 1.4%, and on average every year.
And Ben Zaranko, obviously the conditions in about a year since Labour came back to power have changed economically, not least to do with President Trump's tariffs and so forth. This document, this spending review today, it is a living, breathing thing, isn't it? It's going to change. It's going to have to adapt.
It may adapt a bit, but the whole point is to try and set out plans for the rest of the Parliament, give departments and public services budgets and say, here you are, live within them, deliver the services, go and do your thing. And they will be hoping they don't have to revisit them. Now, if circumstances change enough, of course, perhaps, but I think the hope will be these can be fixed for a few years, worry about something else for a bit, and we'll see in the autumn.
Well, thank you all. I'm going to thank our viewers, first of all, for sending in those questions. We hope you got a lot of useful information. Ben Chu, Ben Zaranko and Kevin Peachy, thank you very much. You're watching BBC Verified Live. Do stay with us here on BBC News.
Hello there. Warm and humid is the forecast for the next few days for all areas, but particularly so for England and Wales. But this combination of heat and humidity is likely to set off some heavy and thundery downpours, which will be pushing up from the south. Now, we've got high pressure over the near continent drawing this warm and humid air from France, and low pressure, it's weather fronts out in the Atlantic trying to make inroads and destabilising the atmosphere. So tonight most places will be dry, warm and muggy. We'll start to see some heavy showers and thunderstorms pushing up across the Channel Islands into southwest England and South Wales. Some of these could be heavy, risk of some localised flooding. Double figure values for all. So we start Thursday off on a warm and humid note. We'll have showers and thunderstorms from the word go across southwest England. These pushing into Wales, Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland as we head into the afternoon. And again, some of them could be heavy with the risk of some localised flooding. But elsewhere, it stays dry and sunny with some variable cloud. Top temperatures again around the mid-20s and feeling humid. Friday, probably the peak of the heat, especially the southeast of England. We'll see some sunshine here, scattered thundery downpours developing pretty widely, spreading their way northwards through the course of the day. Top temperatures, high 20s in the southeast. We could hit the 30 Celsius mark, low 20s further north and west. But as we head into the weekend, the Atlantic winds out, it turns cooler and fresher with temperatures returning closer to the seasonal norm. Showers in the north, sunnier in the south.
Newscast is different to the stuff that we all do in our day jobs because it's like a proper chat.
Something big's just happened.
And then we're just like, right, gonna do an episode.
We've all tried to get together.
We're just all working something out, and then you sort of have a eureka moment.
What you need to know when you need to know it.
Newscast. Listen every day on BBC Sounds. When the weather can't make up its mind, we can help you make up yours. Check on the BBC Weather app.
This is better known to you and me as a flying car.
This is not your typical farm. It's food of the future.
A highly secure facility that monitors foreign governments' attempts to destabilise democracy.
Why are we so suited and booted for this task? The idea is to learn more about how volcanoes behave so that we can better predict eruptions.
This is a prime location for big companies to show us their latest products.
I'm going to go in and have a look. Using technology, distribution is now 98% efficient.
This is the potential of electric power in the marine industry.
Can we fire it up?
Once we close the doors behind us, no one can hear you scream.
I better not touch it anymore.
This is one of the most incredible things I've ever done.
I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Tech Now. Watch on BBC iPlayer.